back at it. We back at it, guys. Salute to everybody. Peace, blessings, positivity. How everybody doing this afternoon? All right. Salute. This is the New Era Young Lord Book Club, also known as the AfroTaino Book Club. If this is your first time here, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen, sharing this live, it's just showing me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to get the message out to the masses. So without further ado, we are going to jump into part 4 of War Against All Puerto Ricans by Nelson Dennis. Boom. We got about 2.5 hours left of the book, guys. So we're going to jump right into it. But I want to give you guys a friendly reminder. Don't forget to support the New Ever Young Lords Back to Borinquen project. They are going back to Yabucoa, Puerto Rico from October 6th to the 15th to be able to support the Marcos Sanchez Community Center. If you haven't heard, the Marcos Sanchez Community Center was a school that closed down due to lack of funds and resources. So the community took over the school and turned it into an emerging community center to be able to help out just in case any catastrophic events, to be able to bring the community together and so on and so forth. But I don't want to talk too much right now because I do want to get into this so that way we can start this off. But let's get it, guys. Oh, I don't know what happened here.
Events. Chapter 17. Last Days. The news of Vidal Santiago's kidnapping spread rapidly through the Nationalist Party. As of October 23rd, Vidal and Faustino Diaz-Pacheco had been missing for nearly 3 weeks. The tension grew throughout the island as insular police forces broke into more and more people's homes searching for guns, Puerto Rican flags, and other subversive material. Several prisoners in La Princesa claimed they'd been tortured in Aguadilla somewhere near an airport. Maybe Vidal was there. It was clear to everyone that the Nationalist Party had been infiltrated. Whether due to bribery, trickery, or torture, someone at a very high level had betrayed them. There were too many arrests, and the police and FBI were too precise. They knew exactly where to look and whom to follow. On top of everything, Pedro Albizu Campos received word that someone, from the FBI or CIA or a highly paid professional, was preparing to assassinate him. In order to justify all this, Governor Luis Muñoz Marin was accusing Albizu and the Nationalists of being communists, fascists, subversives, and political gangsters. J. Edgar Hoover was fuming. As FBI director, he was supposed to control the spread of communism in the United States. But Governor Luis Muñoz Marin was complaining about it in Puerto Rico. This meant that Hoover, with over 200 FBI agents throughout the island, was failing at his job. The more he thought about it, the more he blamed Muñoz Marin. The man was a mess, smoking opium and drinking rum, while nationalists were buying guns, waving flags, and holding rallies all over the island. What use was a governor who couldn't keep his own people in line? This drug addict wants to have a banana republic with U.S. air conditioning, he told Clyde Tolson, his handsome assistant. Then he burned up the phone lines. Arrest somebody, you son of a bitch, he told Jack West, the unfortunate agent who had picked up the phone at San Juan's FBI headquarters. Within 24 hours, the surveillance detail on Albizu Campos was doubled, and a zero-tolerance order was sent to all FBI and insular police personnel. The Nationalists were to be followed, hounded, and arrested as never before. Hoover also made a call to Ramey Air Force Base, with instructions regarding a prisoner named Vidal Santiago, known to be Albizu's personal barber, and a member of the Santurce chapter of the Nationalist Party. Vidal was waiting for the end. It might come that evening or the next day at dawn. In any case, it would be soon. Ever since the sodium pentothal injections, he'd been left alone. But Vidal knew it was only a matter of time. They hadn't been able to break him. Now they had to kill him. Sure enough, that night around 10 p.m., Rolf opened the cell and told him to get ready. Vidal put on his soiled pants and filthy torn undershirt and said nothing. At least a dozen times he prepared himself for the last moments of life. He thought of his father, of Albizu, of all those he had loved, and he was thankful to be dying true to a belief and to his companions in battle. Soldiers hooded and handcuffed Vidal, then stuffed him into a large black car with tinted windows. Rolf sat in front. Vidal was sandwiched between two soldiers in the rear. He closed his eyes in the cramped space and tried to talk to God as he had many times before, but he couldn't concentrate on the prayer. His anxiety was too great. God would understand. After nearly an hour, somewhere in the Cordillera mountain range, the car came to a stop. A great many soldiers had cordoned off the road, blocking traffic in both directions. This had to be the site of the assassination. But no. They switched Vidal into another identical car and drove on. As they passed Vega Alta on PR-22 and came within 20 miles of San Juan, Vidal thought of another possibility. They weren't going to shoot him. They were going to throw him in jail for life. They'd found the guns in the basement next door to his shop. Or maybe Faustino Diaz Pacheco had informed on him. But they didn't want to make a martyr of him. They would first discredit him in a messy public trial, paint him as a black-hearted terrorist, a psychotic antichrist, and then they'd lock him up and throw away the key, just as they had with Albizu Campos. Despite the hood, Vidal knew when they passed La Peña and the Vergaras mountain peaks. These were the bumpiest, most winding roads in the Bayamon township. There was no mistaking them. The car was less than 10 miles from San Juan. Vidal wasn't sure if Rolf was still with them. No one had spoken for the past hour. They rode in silence as the car twisted and dipped. Then they came to a hard stop. Vidal had no idea where. The hood was snatched off his head, and the car door opened. A soldier told him to get out and shoved him onto the street. As he looked up from the ground, Vidal saw Rolf's boot an inch from his face. He cringed immediately, but the blow never came. Instead, Rolf yanked him to his feet and pointed to 4 black Buick Roadmasters, parked 50 feet apart on each street corner. It was an FBI spider's web.
Listen up.
Rolf told Vidal that the cars were there for him. If he wanted to go anywhere, even to church, he had to ask the FBI for permission.
Listen.
Otherwise, he would be shot. For a moment, about a block away, Vidal, still disoriented, saw a familiar face. One of his old Santurce cadets. Without thinking, he yelled, "Faustino es la chota." Faustino is the traitor. The words resounded through the street. Rolf slapped Vidal and shoved him through a doorway into a large room. Then Rolf and the soldiers drove off. Vidal was alone. He looked all around. He was back in his old barber shop, the Salon Boricua. That same day, October 26th, Albizu Campos and other nationalists drove to the town of Fajardo to commemorate the birth of General Antonio Valero de Bernabe, a 19th century hero of Puerto Rican independence. They visited his grave with enormous Puerto Rican flags, each measuring over 200 square feet, in open violation of the gag law. The FBI and insular police surrounded the cemetery, but they did not arrest Albizu for the flags. Faustino Diaz Pacheco had already informed them of greater, more rewarding violations by the nationalists. The police only needed to wait. At 8:30 p.m., Albizu broadcast a speech on WMDD about General de Bernabe and his dream of Puerto Rican independence.
Listen.
During the dinner that followed, a nationalist walked into the restaurant and told Albizu that Vidal Santiago was back in the Salon Boricua, surrounded by a horde of FBI agents. Then he leaned in and whispered what Vidal had shouted. "Faustino es la chota." Albizu nodded quietly. He'd already suspected as much. Faustino had disappeared completely. Only 3 people on the whole island knew the locations of the weapons,
Listen.
the schedule and strategy for the entire revolution, and the identities of its leaders. Albizu, Cadets Commander Raimundo Diaz Pacheco, and his brother Faustino. He remarked that the policemen would kill them right then if they could get away with it. It was brother against brother on this island. After dinner, around midnight, They all drove back to San Juan in a 6-car caravan. Albizu's own car, 2 nationalist cars, and 3 police cars. After a few minutes, once they were clear of the town, the police cars repeatedly attempted to force Albizu's car to the side of the road, but the other nationalist cars kept blocking them. Finally, after much maneuvering, Albizu was able to drive home safely. The other 2 cars, however, encountered a serious problem. At 3:10 a.m., Sergeant Astol Calero cornered one of the nationalist escort cars on Avenida Juan Ponce de Leon, near the Martin Peña Channel. He opened the trunk and found 2 .37 caliber guns, 5 Molotov cocktails, and a Thompson submachine gun. At 3:15 a.m., officers Elmo Caban and Vicente Colon received a radio call at the Santurce police station. "Bring a bus, quick!" yelled Sergeant Calero. At 3:30 a.m., the bus arrived, and Antonio Moyaveles was arrested. By 4 a.m., the second nationalist car had been detained near Calle Gayama in Santurce. Officers found Molotov cocktails in the trunk. Rafael Burgos Fuentes, Eduardo Lopez Vasquez, and Jose Mejias Flores were arrested. And so it began. When he awoke the next morning, Albizu heard about the arrests. Unless he acted immediately, he would be arrested too, within a matter of days, if not hours. They'd rig another jury, ambush him with the gag law, and imprison everybody for another 10 years.
Listen up.
And that would be the end of the revolution. He also heard from journalist Ruth Reynolds that U.S. Secretary of Defense Louis Johnson had ordered Governor Luis Muñoz Marin to liquidate the Nationalist Party and arrest its leadership. Should the arrests prove difficult,
let's tap that
the
screen,
leadership
guys.
should be assassinated. But no, not this time. This time they would not be victims. This time they would fight back with whatever weapons they had. On October 27th, 1950, Albizu Campos said no mas. On that day he contacted his top leaders, and the Puerto Rican Revolution got underway. The very next day, the same newspaper reported 2 stories. Ocupan bombas, pistolas a líderes nacionalistas. DuPont hace una bomba de hidrogeno superpoderosa. The first described the weapons found in a nationalist car, 3 pistols and 5 Molotov cocktails. The second described the new U.S. hydrogen bomb, a 10.4 megaton beast, hundreds of times stronger than those dropped on Japan, whose mushroom cloud would bloom 120,000 feet into the stratosphere. Many on the island called it the Truman atomic bomb. In addition, during World War II, the United States had produced 22 aircraft carriers, 8 battleships, 48 cruisers, 349 destroyers, 420 convoy escorts, 203 submarines, 99,000 fighter aircraft, 97,000 bomber planes, 57,000 training aircraft, 23,000 transport aircraft, 92,000 tanks, 105,000 mortars, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2.3 million military trucks, and 2.6 million machine guns.
Damn.
In a 20th century version of David versus Goliath, Albizu Campos and the Nationalists were waging a revolution against the most powerful nation in history.
He ended that one off with a bang right there. He definitely gave you a whole bunch of things to think about. But keep tapping that screen, keep sharing this live. Guys, for everybody on TikTok, we are live on YouTube, and everybody on YouTube, we are live on TikTok. So if you guys miss the rest of the book, you guys can also go back on YouTube, go look at the archive, and go listen to it from the beginning up into the end. Today should be the last time we play this book. We have about 2 hours and 32 minutes left of the book, so we're going to try to end this out today. But if you guys could do me a favor, if you guys could hop over to YouTube, shoot me a subscribe, maybe watch a little bit, engage over there, so that way we could bring up the algorithm. Like I said, I want to be able to bring more education and knowledge to the people, so that way I'm gonna have a free archive for you guys to be able to go back and listen to on your own spare time. Just keep tapping that screen, keep sharing this live. I appreciate all the love and support, guys. Let's get right back into the book. We on chapter, doesn't even say the chapter, here we go, it just says War Against All Puerto Ricans. Hold on.
Events.
We just did events. I don't know what happened.
Chapter 18.
There we go.
Revolution. On October 28, 1950, the Puerto Rican Revolution started with a prison break, planned and executed by a notorious murderer named Correa Cotto. Cotto started an argument during a morning baseball game in the exercise yard of El Oso Blanco, the White Bear Penitentiary, in Rio Piedras. He made sure that the argument spilled over into the lunchroom, with both teams fighting and throwing plates at each other. Cotto used the chaos to slit a guard's throat, grab his gun and keys, and lead a raid into the prison arsenal. A dozen armed prisoners followed Cotto out to the main gate, where they killed a second guard, wounded 4 others, and shot their way to freedom. Within 20 minutes, the prisoners were running down Calles Borri and Cavalieri, Avenida José de Diego, and a dozen other streets. Over 500 prisoners rioted, and 110 managed to escape to all corners of the island. As El Imparcial noted on the front page, Motín en el presidio 110 se fugan tras matar guardias. It was a bold, unorthodox move. Instead of chasing nationalists, the insular police now had to chase 110 fugitives all over Puerto Rico. Also, since Correa Cotto was a career criminal with no interest in politics, no one could blame the nationalists for the prison break. Finally, from a public relations standpoint, it would look patently absurd and outright colonialist for the authorities to arrest Albizu Campos while 110 murderers, rapists, and thieves were on the loose.
F1.
The chess game had begun. The government made the next move. The same night as the prison break, acting on information from confidential informants, the Insular Police raided the house of Meliton Muñiz Santos, president of the Ponce chapter of the Nationalist Party. Within minutes, they found pistols and ammunition, 22 Molotov cocktails, 69 Puerto Rican flags, and a portrait of Pedro Albizu Campos, all in violation of Public Law 53. The next morning, on October 29th, while the Insular Police pursued the fugitives, J. Edgar Hoover flew 60 more FBI agents to Puerto Rico. He demanded that Governor Luis Muñoz Marin declare a state of martial law in order to facilitate the mass arrests that Hoover insisted were long overdue. But Hoover didn't have to stand for re-election. The governor did. No martial law was declared. Within a few hours, the bullets started flying in 8 towns. Peñuelas. Meliton Muñiz Santos was not home when the FBI raided his house in Ponce, but according to his mother, the agents knew exactly where to look for his weapons. They went directly to them. Someone had evidently informed the Bureau. Meliton Muñiz Santos immediately rushed to various safe houses in the Ponce area and relocated over 50 crates of submachine guns, pistols, ammunition, and grenades. He hid them on a farm in Barrio Macana in the town of Peñuelas. It didn't help. The police knew about this location, too. At 3 a.m. on October 30th, 3 dozen Insular Police surrounded the farm and attacked the main house. At one point, a young nationalist named Guillermo González Ubides horrified the combatants on both sides of the gunfight. He opened a door and walked slowly, as if in a trance, toward the police. Everyone stopped shooting. He didn't say a word. He simply looked straight ahead and kept walking. Then, when he was 20 feet from the police, he raised a pistol. Every gun fired, hitting Guillermo from all sides. Over a dozen bullets tore into his face and body. But somehow Guillermo kept walking. When he was 10 feet from the police cars, he raised his pistol again, and another fusillade ripped him apart. Then no one moved. A silence descended. The coquilles sang in a distant field. A frightened cow mooed in a barn. The smoke from the police rifles curled up into the sky. The fight didn't last much longer after that. 6 policemen were wounded, 3 nationalists were killed, and the rest were arrested. The leader of the raid, Insular Police Lieutenant Ismael Lugo Torres, received a special departmental commendation. 2 days later, several farmers said they saw Guillermo's ghost walking around in circles with a gun in his hand, as if patrolling the fields. Jayuya. 8 hours after the Penuelas shootout, in the home of Blanca Canales, 18 nationalists stood before a Puerto Rican flag and bowed their heads as Canales led them through a solemn oath. I pledge my life to the liberty of Puerto Rico.
Listen, write that name down, Blanca Canales. Please do your research. Go do some backlogging yourself and go find out who these individuals are. You hear them names, they're not going to go in depth on who they are. They're just going to highlight specific things they've done. Go in depth on our ancestors, guys. Go in depth on our historical figures, guys. Tap that screen, share this live. Let's keep it going.
The group then jammed into 3 vehicles and left Canales' home in the Barrio Coabe section of Jayuya. By noon, 2 vehicles had reached the Jayuya police station, and 14 nationalists had surrounded the building.
Go look up the Jayuya uprising. Please, go look up the Jayuya uprising.
Surrender your arms and there will be no bloodshed today, yelled their leader, Carlos Irizarry Rivera. Carlos was a respected man in Jayuya, a World War II veteran and a law student at the University of Puerto Rico. But the Insular Police ignored him and started firing. The first man they hit was Carlos. Shots rang out through Calles Figueras and Matei as the police barricaded themselves behind piles of steel drums, blocking every entrance to the building. An Insular police car rolled up from Barrio Mamayis and took a position on Calle Torrado. Within an hour, the policeman jumped off a rear balcony, ran into the rectory of Our Lady of Montserrat, and asked the priests for asylum. By 12:45, the police station was on fire. The post office was in flames at 2 p.m. The U.S. Selective Service office was overrun at 4 p.m. The nationalists removed all the draft cards, paperwork, machines, and equipment, and set them on fire in the middle of the street. By 5 p.m., Blanca Canales had cut all telephone lines to the town. A crowd formed in the town square at 6 p.m. The smoke was still rising from the police station as Canales announced the start of the revolution. Her hands trembled as she unfurled a Puerto Rican flag. "Que viva Puerto Rico libre!" she shouted, then raised the banner. After a brief impassioned speech, a young boy arrived to tell her that Carlos Irizarry Rivera had been seriously wounded. He later bled to death. Blanca Canales was arrested on the outskirts of Jayuya that night while trying to find a doctor for Carlos. The Insular Police didn't dare re-enter the town and told reporters that hundreds of nationalists with machine guns had attacked the police station. Their story was so convincing that on November 1st, the United States scrambled 10 P-47 Thunderbolt fighter planes out of Ramey Air Force Base and bombed the town. The planes dropped 500-pound, 227-kilogram bombs and strafed the town with 50-caliber armor-piercing machine guns, each Thunderbolt releasing up to 1,200 rounds per minute. It was the only time in history that the United States had bombed its own citizens. After bombing Jayuya, the planes machine-gunned the farms, sugarcane fields, and mountains surrounding the town.
And I think he really meant at that point in time, that's the first time they did that, because you can't forget about the MOVE movement, and they got bombed as well. The United States bombed the MOVE movement, their house, so we can't forget about that. But I think when he says that, he's specifically speaking at that time. But let's get back into the book. I just wanted to clarify that.
Anyone who staggered out, wounded or not, was arrested immediately. People were arrested on public roads and in their homes. The day after the bombing, the 296th Regiment of the U.S. National Guard occupied Jayuya, arriving in hundreds of army trucks. Guardsmen stormed every neighborhood and shut down all the avenues. Nearly 4,000 troops marched through a town with only 12,000 residents. They established positions on every intersection and bus stop, raided several schools, and arrested people at random. They also attacked Blanca Canales' house, even though no one was home. In Barrio Coabe and Barrio Mamayas, on Calle San Felipe and Avenida Vicens, the troops created firing lines with machine guns, mortars, carbines, and Garand semi-automatic rifles. They fired over 1,000 rounds of .30 caliber bullets into one mountain alone, and hid within the rubble of bombed-out houses in order to fire on those still standing. On November 3rd, the Adjutant General of the National Guard, Luis R. Esteves, reported to the governor that Jayuya had been pacified. Utuado. Utuado was a strategically vital town. Located near the center of Puerto Rico, it was the island's third largest municipality, and whoever held it would control troop movements into the western half of the island. The Rio Abajo forest on the border of Utuado and Arecibo provided 9 square miles of uncharted hiding spaces. Utuado also had strong local agriculture and several livestock haciendas, whose owners sympathized with Albizu's cause. With all these natural advantages in mind, Albizu developed a 2-step plan for a revolution, with Utuado as its centerpiece. First, the nationalists would organize simultaneous revolts at 12 p.m. in San Juan, Jayuya, Peñuelas, Arecibo, Mayagüez, Naranjito, Ponce, and Utuado. Second, after the initial wave of revolts, all the rebels would head into Utuado, where they could hold out for a month or more. Utuado was thus crucial to the revolution. The nationalists did not need to win a war against America, which was impossible. They only needed to get the world's attention, so that the United Nations and other international organizations would pressure the United States to give up its colony. The plan's only flaw was that the Americans had already heard about it from Faustino Diaz Pacheco. And so, on October 30th, 1950, a tragedy unfolded in Utuado. In the early morning, 32 nationalists gathered at the home of Heriberto Castro Rios and split into 2 groups. The first attacked the federal post office just before noon and set it on fire. The second attacked the Insular police station. But the officers were ready and waiting for them, with snipers and street barricades all along Avenida Esteves. They shot several nationalists, so the rebels retreated to the house of Damian Torres, president of the Tuado chapter of the Nationalist Party. "Hey, Arrayo," said Antonio Gonzalez, as gunshots followed them into the house and continued for 2 hours. The nationalists returned fire from Damian's balcony, and hundreds of shell casings piled up on the floor. After the first hour, 17-year-old Antonio started to break down. Tears ran down his face, and he whimpered as he reloaded his gun, aimed, fired, and rammed home another cartridge. But he never stopped firing. At sunset, the nationalists turned off every light and looked out from a darkened house. In the distance, a plume rose from the burnt post office. In the shadows, the police crept closer. They stormed a rear door, but the nationalists stopped them. At 8 p.m., 1,000 National Guardsmen stormed into Utuado. They concentrated their troops around Damian's house, and one unit set up an M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun at a gas station 120 yards away. At 11 p.m., they fired 600 bullets per minute for nearly 5 minutes into Damian's house.
Tap that screen, guys. Let's tap that screen.
At 11:30 p.m., they did it again. Every resident of Utuado heard the machine gun as it blasted over 5,000 bullets into one wooden structure. The nationalists lay on the floor while the house exploded around them. The staircase shattered, and part of the second floor crashed into the living room. Several of the nationalists began to pray. Others had to be pulled out from under the rubble. "Ay, santo!" shouted a nationalist, and all the others rushed over. Their leader, Heriberto Castro, was dead, shot in the neck and chest. They lowered him onto a shot-up mattress, wrapped him in a large Puerto Rican flag, and said a few quick prayers. Suddenly, a booming voice announced, "Come out with your hands up and no one will be hurt. We guarantee your safety if you surrender. If you don't surrender, we will grenade your house within 5 minutes." The 9 surviving nationalists argued fiercely among themselves. None of them trusted the National Guard, but within 5 minutes they filed out of the house. They were immediately surrounded by guns and bayonets, thrown onto the ground and searched. Then the National Guard prodded them with bayonets down Calle de Cueto and ordered them to remove their shoes, belts, and personal belongings. They marched down the street nearly naked, holding their pants up, with the National Guard laughing behind them. At 1 a.m. they neared the police station, but they never made it to the front door. The guardsmen shoved them into a side street on the corner of Washington Street and Betances Avenue, where an M1919A4 Browning machine gun had been set up. "You won't be killing policemen anymore," said an officer, and the machine gun opened fire. Every nationalist was shot. Antonio Ramos died instantly, shot through the head and chest. Agustin Quinones Mercado's legs were shredded like ground beef. His left leg was almost completely severed from his body, remaining connected only by 2 tendons. Antonio Gonzalez asked for water while bleeding to death. "You want water?" said a guardsman, then stabbed him in the chest with a bayonet. Julio Feliciano Colon died while writing "Asesinos" on the pavement with his own blood. The soldiers later erased it. The machine gun fired non-stop at the men for several minutes. A few doors and windows opened along the Cumbre Alta, and several civilians started yelling, "Murderers! Criminals! We see what you're doing!" The guardsmen fired over their heads and told them to close their doors and mind their own business. The Insular Police Precinct was less than 200 feet away, but no one, not the police, not the National Guard, called for medical attention. They just stood there and watched the men bleed to death, listening to them beg for water as they slowly dehydrated. 4 hours later, the first sugarcane workers left home for work. They saw the bodies of 9 men lying in a pool of blood. When a doctor finally arrived at 5 a.m., 5 nationalists were gravely wounded. 4 were dead. The corpses were left on display for the entire town to see, for 5 more hours until 10 a.m. Blood ran in the gutter. Stray dogs roamed over the dead, licking their faces and eating their intestines, which had spilled out onto the street. Later that day, the guardsmen retreated temporarily from Utuado, while 4 P-47 Thunderbolt planes bombed the town more thoroughly than they had Jayuya. Each plane carried a payload capacity of 2,500 pounds.
Yo, listen to the level of force that they're willing to use. Mind you, and this is what's like the irony, these are still U.S. citizens. You're treating them like you're invading another country when you already invaded them already. You just causing the same destruction and chaos just to be able to keep these people in the position that you want them in, not giving them any position to thrive. You don't see what the tactics are just for speaking out and wanting better for your people and your country? You don't see the limits and tactics that they go to be able to suppress that? The proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the history, guys. Keep tapping that screen. Keep sharing this live. Guys, we are live on YouTube and TikTok. YouTube, we are live on TikTok. So if you guys could do me a favor, go shoot me a follow on TikTok and shoot me a subscribe on YouTube. You guys be able to go check out the archive just in case you missed anything. You'll be able to go recap everything you missed. Today's going to probably be the last day that we're playing War Against All Puerto Ricans. We have 2 hours and 15 minutes, so we're gonna try to finish this off today, but let's end it out strong, guys. Let's tap the screen, share this live. Everything works off algorithm, whether you're on TikTok or YouTube. So the more participation, the more active we are on the platform, the more people come into the room. Salute to everybody. Thank you for the gifts, thank you for the love, and thank you for the support. Let's keep it going.
By the time they were finished, the town lay in ruins. El Imparcial ran a huge full-page headline that said, "Air Force bombs Utuado. Aviación bombardea Utuado." The priest at the church of San Miguel, Father Barandiaran, had fled from Spain during the Spanish Civil War. "This whole town has gone crazy," he said. "If I had known this, I would have stayed in Navarro." Arecibo, Mayagüez, Ponce, and Naranjito. The October 30 uprisings in Arecibo, Mayagüez, Ponce, and Naranjito were a disorganized mess.
Listen up.
With the hurried order to start the revolution, Everything happened too early or too late. Decisions were made on the fly. There was no coordination or communication between the towns. Once the National Guard shut down the major roads, it was every town for itself. Arecibo started too early. It was the only town that enjoyed the element of surprise when it attacked the police station at 11 a.m. The Nationalists killed Lieutenant Ramon Villanueva and 3 other insular police officers, but did not capture the station. They hurried away, and one of them, Hipólito Miranda Diaz, was shot and killed while covering their retreat. Mayagüez started too late. By the time the Nationalists approached the insular police station at 2 p.m., the policemen had been waiting for them for nearly 2 hours. The Nationalists backed off. The next day, October 31st, in Barrio La Quinta, police attacked the home of José Cruzado Ortiz, and the Nationalists retreated into the mountains. In Ponce, a Nationalist tried to burn a building on Calle Victoria del Barrio Segundo and was arrested. Another group was stopped in front of the Ponce cement factory. A gunfight ensued, and police officer Aurelio Miranda was killed. The police were also ready and waiting in Naranjito. The Nationalists failed to take the police station and retreated into the surrounding mountains. A World War II veteran named José Antonio Negron, however, managed to put up a remarkable fight, staging raids and gunfights for over a week. Negron did not drink, gamble, or owe anyone any money. He was a man of respect and held in great local esteem, which enabled him to wage a one-man guerrilla war against the police and National Guard until November 10th, with no one ratting him out. When Negron was finally arrested in the Barrio Palos Altos de Corozal, a reporter asked him why he'd held out for so long. Negron responded, "Because giving up was not our mission. We were trying to bring international attention to the reality of Puerto Rico." San Juan. A blue 1949 Plymouth made its way to the governor's mansion. It was 11:55 a.m. and unusually hot on October 30th, as the Nationalists drove west on Calle La Fortaleza. Everywhere they looked, on every rooftop and street corner, on balconies and in parked cars, they saw the evidence of Faustino Diaz Pacheco's betrayal. For the last 4 days, the FBI and Insular Police had arrested Nationalists all over the island. For the last 4 days, the FBI and Insular Police had arrested Nationalists all over the island. They knew exactly where the weapons were stashed and who had buried them. The world fell apart for the Nationalist Party the moment Vidal Santiago yelled, "Faustino es la chota." With great regret, Pedro Albizu Campos realized that Vidal was right, and he removed Raimundo as his commander-in-chief. The military head of the revolution was now Tomás López de Victoria, and Raimundo was completely shut out of all planning and decision-making. Faustino, of course, was nowhere to be found. Raimundo could not bear the shame. His own brother had turned the revolution into one great island-wide martyrdom. Now there remained one last suicide mission, and Raimundo had to lead it. No one spoke in the car. Everyone knew what was coming. If by some miracle they penetrated the mansion, they would rush the second-floor offices, find the governor, and threaten to kill him. Then they'd call every news agency and demand Puerto Rico's independence. Killing the governor was not a priority, but they were prepared to do it. The mansion was 1,500 feet away. A police car followed about 200 feet behind them. Insular Police, National Guardsmen, and rooftop snipers packed every cross street. Calle O'Donnell, Calle Cruz, Calle MacArthur, Calle del Cristo, Calle Clara Lair. Yet none of them stopped the car. With each passing block, they were driving deeper and deeper into a seeming trap. 2 men rode in front, 3 in back, all of them lost in their own thoughts, saying goodbye to their families, friends, and loved ones, praying. They had all worn their Sunday best suit, best shirt, best tie. They were all prepared to die. Raimundo told them to get ready, and they all fingered their weapons. Raimundo had a submachine gun on the floor of the car. As they approached the main entrance to La Fortaleza, the first shot hit the driver, Domingo Geraldo Resto, in the temple. He spilled out of the car with his head nearly underneath it. Raimundo was the first one out. He leaped from the front passenger seat, firing his submachine gun and wounding 2 guards. Then he shot into the second-floor windows and ran for cover behind a palm tree. Roberto Acevedo Quiñones jumped out of the right rear door, shooting in all directions, and made it about 20 feet. He was hit and fell face down with a dust-raising thud. Manuel Torres Medina jumped out of the left, circled right, and was killed as quickly as Quiñones, less than 10 feet from the car. From the roof of the mansion, Detective Carmelo Davila took careful aim with his carbine and fired once. Raimundo dropped dead in the hot sun beside a splendid palm tree. The driver, Domingo Geraldo, though hit in the temple, crawled to the mansion and leaned against a wall. The police thought he was dead, but they approached him with their guns drawn to make sure. "I'm already dead. Please don't shoot me anymore," Geraldo pleaded. They shot him again. The only survivor, 23-year-old Gregorio Hernandez, crawled under the car and traded gunfire for an hour, losing blood the whole time. When he finally passed out, they dragged him into the open by his feet. He had 19 bullet wounds and 5 bullets still inside him. Governor Luis Muñoz Marin watched from the mansion. When a bullet crashed through the blinds and buried itself in his office wall, he shoved past his attorney general, crawled into an inner room, and urgently called U.S. Brigadier General Edwin L. Seibert, demanding a battalion of National Guardsmen to fight the 5 nationalists. When Seibert said that he thought the governor didn't want to declare martial law, Muñoz Marin shot back that he was declaring it now. Later that afternoon, a photographer captured the scene in a high-angle panoramic photo. 2 men lie dead in the hot sun. No one pays any attention to them. Police and FBI agents stand around taking notes, exchanging views, smoking cigarettes, killing time. The dead men lie in their own blood, arms and legs akimbo, devoid of dignity, like broken toys in the hot sun. The revolution was ending in San Juan. Less than 6 blocks away, at 156 Calle Sol, dozens of police and National Guardsmen had surrounded Albizu Campos's apartment. They took positions on all corners, behind cars and on the rooftops. 2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns set up 40 yards away, on opposite ends of the street, placed Albizu's balcony in a deadly crossfire. Efrain Lopez Corcharo tried to enter Albizu's apartment and was killed on the spot. Soldiers carried him away like last night's garbage. A little after 5 p.m., Albizu peered through the window blinds and saw the mounting firepower. He and 3 supporters, Jose Muñoz Matos, Doris Torresola, and Carmen Maria Perez, began to build a wall of books behind the window. When it had reached almost 4 feet, a police captain shouted through a megaphone, "Pedro Albizu Campos, you are under arrest. Will you surrender peacefully?" It was an order, not a question.
Let's tap the screen, guys.
Ignored it. They built the wall higher, until without warning, a machine gun volley ripped into the apartment. The window shades shattered, and the room's occupants threw themselves to the ground as bullets smashed into the stucco wall, destroying everything they hit. Books flew, and a table split in 2. When the barrage finally ended, Doris lay on the floor, shot in the throat.
Thanks for the gifts.
Albizu pressed a towel against the wound, but the bleeding didn't stop. At Albizu's request, Jose and Carmen carried Doris down to the street, and all 3 of them were arrested immediately. In all the confusion, by some fluke, a nationalist named Alvaro Rivera Walker managed to run upstairs. He had been a cadet and visited Albizu several times. The old man trusted him. He invited Alvaro to come in and grab a gun. For the next few hours they guarded the window, watched the door, and traded shots with the police. By nightfall, Albizu understood the situation. He told Alvaro that their attackers would love to kill him, but couldn't. They needed a prisoner, not a martyr. The lights and water had been cut off, but Albizu had 2 gallons of water and some canned sardines. They slept fitfully that night. Every few minutes a desultory shot would hit the vicinity of their window. The next morning, Chief of Police Salvador T. Roig sat inside a bulletproof car and through a bullhorn called for a parley. Albizu and Alvaro crept slowly to the balcony, from which they saw dozens of men rushing in all directions. Despite this, through his bullhorn, Roig assured them that they'd be safe. Albizu demanded to know who had been shooting at his window all night. No one responded. Then he asked whether the newsman had reported the death of Efrain Lopez the previous day. Still no response. Next he asked where Doris Torresola was. Again, no answer. Albizu noticed that a city garbage truck was blocking Calle Sol. He looked to his right. Another garbage truck. Police buses blocked both ends of the cross street Calle Cruz. Albizu was totally cut off. The enclosure was a killing zone. Military and police vehicles were everywhere. Soldiers, policemen, and detectives crouched behind them. Searchlights had been brought in. Machine guns had been mounted and bazookas assembled. Snipers lay on the rooftops. 2 armored jeeps drove around the perimeter. It was a full-scale assault, a scene out of World War II. Albizu shook his head in disgust and walked off the balcony. For the rest of the day he watched the windows, and Alvaro watched the stairs, while Chief Roig waited. Time was his friend. At one point, he generally tossed up a pile of newspapers, listing all the arrests made and nationalists killed over the past 2 days. Albizu read them all carefully without saying a word. He noticed a comment from President Harry Truman dismissing the entire revolution as an incident between Puerto Ricans. That night, Albizu rambled on for a while. He talked about Vidal, the barber shop, and the rumor that the barber had been kidnapped. He talked about religion and the difficulty of changing one's fate, both for people and for entire nations. Then he asked a strange question. Alvaro, are we invisible? He said it seemed that they only existed to each other on their island, that nobody heard them or even saw them. Alvaro responded that God saw them. The next day, on November 1st, 1950, 2 men tried to assassinate President Harry Truman to prove that the revolution was not an incident between Puerto Ricans, but rather a war between 2 countries. They went that far and risked that much to be seen and heard. A few hours after the assassination attempt, the U.S. National Guard tear-gassed Albizu's apartment. The FBI rushed in, and the Insular Police arrested him. Washington, D.C. At 2:20 p.m. on November 1st, President Harry S. Truman was napping in his underwear. It was an unusually hot day, and the Trumans were staying in Blair House at 1651 Pennsylvania Avenue, while the White House was undergoing renovations. Awakened by a sudden thundering, the president padded to the second-floor window, peered down, and saw a vicious gunfight in the street. Griselio Torresola and Oscar Collazo had come to assassinate him. Oscar was also a president of the New York chapter of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party.
Tap that screen, guys.
Griselio was the brother of Doris Torresola, the woman shot in Albizu's apartment, and cousin of Blanca Canales, leader of the Jayuya uprising.
Write this down.
The 2 had planned their attack carefully. They had scouted Blair House twice, mapped out all the defenses, choreographed and rehearsed the assault, prepared and oiled their weapons, and walked around like tourists all morning. Once they penetrated the house and killed the president, they knew they would never escape.
Really quick, for everybody on TikTok, we are live on YouTube, so if you missed any of the book, you can always go back and watch the archive. It is the same exact name as here on TikTok, AfroTaino88. So if you can go subscribe, you can always go back and go listen to something or re-listen to it, so that just in case you doze off, you fall asleep. I know audible books are sometimes difficult, but this is how we're going to be able to bring the message to the people. Keep tapping the screen, keep sharing this live, and like I said, everybody on TikTok, we're live on YouTube. Everybody on YouTube, we're live on TikTok. Do me a favor, cross over, go hit subscribe, go hit likes, comments. Let's keep it going, guys.
The suicide mission, just like the attack on La Fortaleza in San Juan. But they had the element of surprise. And whether they succeeded or not, the world would know that the revolution was real. It was not a Caribbean clown show or a mere incident between Puerto Ricans. After getting out of a cab at 2:12 p.m. on the corner of 15th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue, in front of the cathedral-like Riggs National Bank, they took one last stroll past Blair House. Nothing had changed. Only the usual 4 men stood guard. Just like Raimundo Diaz Pacheco and the nationalists who attacked La Fortaleza, the 2 men wore their Sunday best. Griselio wore a gray suit, black shoes, and a brown hat. Oscar chose a striped banker's suit, brown crusader shoes, and a pocket handkerchief. The men approached from separate directions on the sidewalk, carrying a Walther P-38 pistol, a Luger, and 69 bullets. Oscar was supposed to shoot first, but his pistol jammed. He pounded it against his chest and finally managed to fire. Griselio shot a guard and ran toward the Blair House entrance. No one had time to think. Over 100 shots rang out. At one point, Truman opened his second-floor window and looked out.
Really quick, if you have the book and you're following along, we're on Revolution, page 207. I'm about to show you the images right now, but if you guys want to cross over, go watch me on YouTube. We're live on YouTube. Just look up AfroTaino 88 and you'll be able to find me. It's the same image, same name, same everything. But I'm about to show you the images of the book. Let's keep tapping the screen, showing each other support.
Was only 31 feet away and looking in Truman's direction as he reloaded his Luger. In 3 or 4 seconds, he'd have a clear shot at the president. But Griselio never took that shot. A bullet passed clear through his head, spraying pieces of brain, as he staggered through a low hedge and died instantly. A guard named Leslie Caufelt was killed. Oscar took multiple hits and fell to the sidewalk, with 3 tracks of blood running down his face. The next day, nearly every paper in America wrote about the assassination attempt. They showed diagrams of the gun battle. Some called it the biggest Secret Service gunfight in U.S. history, and the first conspiracy to kill a president since Booth shot Lincoln. Many called Oscar and Griselio terrorists and desperados. The Washington Post's headline blared, "Assassin slain, another shot at Truman's door. Puerto Rican terrorists kill guard, wound 2. President glimpses battle's end from window." In a clever red-baiting trick, Governor Luis Muñoz Marin claimed that communists were behind the Truman assassination attempt and the entire nationalist revolution. The New Republic wrote, "The Puerto Ricans who tried to kill Truman were as stupid as they were fanatical." Life reported, "The acts of violence made no sense, except to communists who thrive on disruption in the Caribbean and elsewhere." Time branded it a weird assassination plot involving irrational, unpredictable behavior. The papers reported what Oscar and Griselio had done. Not one paper examined why they had done it. No newspaper mentioned that within the last 24 hours, Griselio's sister Doris had been shot in the throat. His brother Elio had been arrested. His cousin Blanca's house had been invaded by U.S. troops, and all 3 of them now faced life imprisonment. No writer noticed that Oscar's socks were orange and green, the colors of the flag of Jayuya. Most importantly, no newspaper mentioned that just 24 hours earlier, the U.S. Air Force was bombing Jayuya, the town where both these men were born and raised, and where their families still lived.
Whoo, that was a heavy chapter, guys. That was a heavy chapter. Salute to everybody participating. Don't forget, we're also live on YouTube. So if you guys missed the beginning portion of this book, this is part 4 on YouTube. Probably going to be the final part to you of War Against All Puerto Ricans on YouTube. Until maybe down the line, we'll probably revisit it and redo it again. But if you guys missed anything, right, you can also go onto the YouTube and go back and backtrack and backlog and go start off from part 1 all the way to the last part, which is part 4 today. But tap that screen, share this live. I appreciate all the love and support. Let's get back to this chapters. Oh wait, don't forget, Support the Young Lords Back the Borinquen project. We are going to Yabucoa, Puerto Rico from October 6th to October 15th. We will be at the Marco Sanchez Community Center. If you don't know about the Marco Sanchez Community Center, it is a school that closed down due to lack of resources and funds that the community took over to reallocate for emergency purposes such as hurricanes and so on and so forth, and to also bring the community together for community events and community gathering. So if you want to help out the Marco Sanchez Community Center, I advise you to go look them up and see how you can help them directly, or how you can support us in our efforts to be able to bring more support, more supplies to be able to refix the buildings. But salute to everybody. Peace, blessings. Let's keep it going.
Chapter 19. Salon Boricua. It was October 30th. The black Buick Roadmasters sat parked outside the barber shop. The FBI had assigned 17 agents to watch Vidal around the clock, and today was day 5. On day 1, 2 longtime customers, Filadelfo and Santo, were promptly arrested when they walked out of the shop. No one visited Vidal after that, and the FBI wouldn't let him leave. They even broke the green light in front of the salon to control the traffic around him. The broken light didn't bother him much. It was a useless old signal, granting permission that no one had asked for and nobody needed. Certainly no one in the Salon Boricua. The FBI agents brought him food, water, and newspapers. The telephone worked but was obviously bugged, and anyone he called would be arrested as fast as Filadelfo. A tragedy was unfolding, and Vidal was powerless to stop it. He could merely turn on the radio and listen, just like everyone else. Vidal rubbed some aceite rabasa coconut oil on the burns on his chest and right leg where Rolf had put out a few cigarettes. For the last 4 days he'd listened to the radio and read El Imparcial. He heard about the prison break at El Oso Blanco, the shootout at La Fortaleza, the burned police stations, the governor's declaration of martial law, the deployment of 5,000 National Guardsmen, the siege of Pedro Albizu Campos's home.
Listen.
And there was nothing he could do. He made a quick trip to the bathroom and discovered the secret panel was still there. The hidden basement next door contained dozens of loaded weapons and over 6,000 rounds of ammunition. Rayo, he must have thought. Those weapons belonged where the battle was being waged, where they could do some good. Vidal paced around the barber shop, talking to himself and yelling at the radio as an Amos and Andy rerun played on CBS. As the sun went down, out of sheer frustration, Vidal snatched a bottle of Bacardi from under the shoeshine stand. He awoke the next morning with a hangover. The FBI had already tossed El Imparcial against his door. He read it from cover to cover, paying special attention to the arrests occurring all over the island. In San Juan, Ponce and Peñuelas, 400 suspected nationalists had already been detained. Nearly 1,000 more arrests were expected. Governor Luis Muñoz Marin had demanded even more U.S. troops, beyond the 5,000 National Guardsmen, and the use of Fort Buchanan as a prisoner detention center. The most disturbing story was about Albizu Campos. They'd cut off his water and electricity and barricaded the streets. Hundreds of snipers, police, and National Guardsmen had him surrounded, and they'd already shot Doris Torresola in the throat. Anything could happen to Albizu. And then the idea hit him. A way to get himself out from under house arrest and enable him to tell Albizu that they still had weapons. Lots of them. Even after Albizu's inevitable arrest, the revolution could continue. Vidal talked to the FBI agents out front, and they sent a telegram to Vicente Geigel Polanco, the Attorney General of Puerto Rico. Vidal had offered to broker Albizu's surrender. Then Vidal called El Imparcial and told the paper to send a reporter, because Albizu's barber was ready to talk. 3 hours had passed. Vidal called the Attorney General's office twice and left messages. It was now past noon, but no one had come or called. Instead, Vidal noticed a few more cars parked outside the barber shop, most of them belonging to police. Vidal squinted as another car drove up from the Santurce Insular Police Station. WIAC Radio, the best news station on the island, was repeating everything he'd read in El Imparcial. So he tuned into NBC and listened in irritation to several commercials for Lucky Strike cigarettes, X-Lax, Ipana toothpaste, Bucky Beaver, and the Roy Rogers quick shooter hat. Men who rose at 4 a.m. every morning, climbed a mountain in rain or fog or killing heat, and cut sugarcane with mosquitoes flying into their mouths, didn't need an empire telling them what to do, what language to speak, what flag to salute, what heroes to worship, or what products to buy. Vidal took a swig of Bacardi to calm his nerves. Unfortunately, there wasn't much left. He walked over to the shoeshine stand with a little shrine behind it and prayed, a rarity for him. He leafed through a Bible and touched the pages gently with the tips of his fingers. He picked up a statue of Santa Barbara and asked her to guide him. Then something caught his attention, and he rushed to a window. A U.S. Army truck had just rolled up, and a dozen National Guardsmen jumped out. They didn't look like an escort for the Attorney General. They had rifles and grenades, and were taking positions outside the Salon Boricua. Vidal looked quickly around the barber shop, peered out at the soldiers, and came up with a new plan. He turned the radio up loud, ran into the bathroom, and slammed the door. Then he opened the hidden panel, plunged into the next-door basement, and grabbed a box full of weapons. Within 5 minutes, he'd scooped up 2 more boxes and brought them all into the barber shop. He peeked out a window. The soldiers were still in position, awaiting further orders. They weren't even looking at him, and chatted amiably among themselves, as if on a field trip or training exercise. Vidal strolled casually around the shop, singing All by Yourself in the Moonlight, along with the Champion Barbershop Quartet. By the time the song ended, Vidal had placed 3 shotguns and 5 revolvers around the shop, concentrating them near 2 windows and the main door. He stacked 6 Molotov cocktails on a staircase that led to a second-floor apartment. He tucked a Colt M1911 pistol into his waistband. Near the shoeshine stand, behind a 3-foot-thick concrete column, he hid another shotgun, 2 Molotov cocktails, an M3A1 submachine gun, and 40 magazines, each with 30 rounds of .45 caliber ACP bullets. A commercial for Aunt Jemima pancake flour played as the door opened to the shop and an insular policeman walked in with his gun drawn. Vidal asked if he could help him, then shot in his general direction. The cop's cap flew off and he ran out of the shop. Vidal ducked behind the shoeshine stand, and a few seconds later, a hail of bullets tore into the wall behind him. 2 mirrors shattered onto the Coke and barber chair. Vidal took a deep breath, then stood up with the M3A1 submachine gun and blasted 20 rounds through 2 windows in the front door. He also shot out the light bulbs over the 4 barbers' chairs, throwing the shop into dappled shadow. The soldiers ducked for cover. They hadn't expected return fire, let alone from a submachine gun. Reporter Imperio Rodriguez ran into El Machango, a local bar at 379 Calle Colton, and phoned El Imparcial, telling the newspaper to send a photographer immediately. Soldiers surrounded the building on the corner of Calles Colton and Barbosa, as insular police snipers took position atop the buildings on the adjacent corners. With a colorful stucco exterior and pleasant upstairs terrace, the Salon Boricua looked like a harmless senior citizen's home, until a Molotov cocktail sailed down from the second floor. It landed like an angry comet on a police car, scattering cops and soldiers in every direction.
Let's tap that screen,
the soldiers
guys.
blasted the terrace with rifle fire, but then a bronze face with ivory teeth appeared in a second-floor window, and another Molotov cocktail exploded near a National Guard jeep. With everyone scrambling for cover, a spray of .45 caliber ACP bullets from a third window hit the surrounding rooftops, and the snipers ducked. Then everyone started shooting in all directions, as NBC radio took a friendly commercial break. Hit in the leg, Vidal wrapped a towel around his thigh and ducked the fusillade crashing in through 2 windows, as the Bell telephone hour began and Eve Young started to sing, If I Knew You Were Coming, I'd Have Baked a Cake. Vidal started to laugh. Under the circumstances, it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. He started singing along and firing a shotgun out one window, then another. El Imparcial's photographer had arrived. She'd already shot 2 rolls and was calculating the raise she would demand that very afternoon. These photos were priceless, and she knew it. El Imparcial, El Mundo, and El Nuevo Dia had all sent their best Metro reporters. Over a dozen radio stations had sent mobile units, including WIAC, WNEL, WITA, and WKAQ, San Juan, WPRB, Ponce, WCMN and WEMB, Arecibo, WSWL, Santurce, WMDD, Fajardo, WENA, Yauco, Bayamon, and WVJP, Caguas. Even Mayagüez had sent a WECW radio unit from the opposite end of the island. A live shootout between 30 nationalists and the U.S. National Guard was not to be missed. As the reporters, photographers, and radio announcers set up, more National Guardsmen arrived with machine guns, rifles, carbines, and a bazooka, and cemented a line of fire along Calle Barbosa. WIAC's Luis Enrique LBB Marrero and Miguel Angel Alvarez were on the scene. Bibi had been born and raised in the Chicharo section of Santurce and knew Vidal personally. When he asked a platoon lieutenant how many nationalists were in the barber shop, he was told 20 or 30. The lieutenant had no reason to exaggerate, but Bibi was not convinced. He hadn't seen 20 nationalists who could agree on anything, let alone coordinate a military defense. Maybe things had changed. Maybe this revolution had a chance after all. Then Bibi saw 2 M19 19A4 Browning machine guns setting up, and a bazooka team unpacking M6A3 rockets. He forgot he was an uninvolved reporter, and tried to inject some reason into the situation. He called up and asked Vidal how he was doing. When Vidal called down that he was all fucked up, Bibi replied that he was famous, that every radio station on the island was there.
F1, guys, F1.
Vidal told him he'd been listening to the radio as well, but was only getting American crap. When Bibi asked if he needed anything, he said he could use a ticket to Cuba. Bibi said that maybe that could be arranged, and was about to ask how many were with him, when a dozen soldiers opened fire all around him. Bibi ducked for cover. No one was going anywhere that day. He counted 15 police and 25 soldiers, and they concentrated their fire on the front door and windows. The machine guns blew a window off its hinges, and bottles exploded in the shop. A lieutenant called for a ceasefire. The world went still. The front door had blasted into toothpicks. A wisp of smoke curled off a machine gun. Vidal the barber couldn't possibly be alive. A few guardsmen poked out their heads. A police detective crept toward the front door, and the reporters looked at each other. Some of them felt bad for the Mayagüez radio crew. They'd come a long way for nothing. Then, suddenly, a madman appeared at the door and sprayed everyone with hot .45 caliber ACP rounds, then disappeared. Bullets flew. A bazooka shell hit the barber shop, and the reporters screamed. Everyone dashed behind a car, truck, or lamppost, and the radio men went wild. Every town in Puerto Rico was hearing the gunfight. For the first time in history, the entire island was listening to the same live event. The reporters shouted into their microphones, their eyes popping, the bullets snapping over their heads even as they described the scene. Inside the salon, Vidal saw the reporters chattering away, so he crawled over to his General Electric octagon radio, which had been shot in more places than Vidal. It miraculously still worked. He lay underneath it, raised an arm, and flipped from one station to the next. WIAC, WPRB, WSWL, WENA, WVJP, WECW. All were reporting that 20 or 30 nationalists were involved in a shootout with the U.S. government at the Salon Boricua. Vidal shook his head. All this technology was supposed to unite people and create a better understanding. Instead, it kept them apart and confused the simplest things. Maybe that was the idea all along. Through a bullhorn, the lieutenant called out to Vidal that he and his men did not want to harm him. Vidal shouted down that they should tell that to his leg, which they'd shot pretty badly. The lieutenant yelled for Vidal and his associates to come out with their hands up, and Vidal shouted back that he didn't have any friends. The lieutenant rejoined that what he did have was 1 minute. After that, they were coming in. Vidal didn't need a minute. He snuck up the back stairs and flung down 3 Molotov cocktails, but only one of them exploded,
Thanks
and
for the
2
follow.
machine gun volleys ripped into the building. The .30 caliber bullets knocked off almost every door and window, blew louvers off their hinges, pockmarked the stucco facade, and pierced and splintered the wooden balcony in 100 places. Vidal ran back downstairs and hid behind the only protected spot, the 3-foot-thick concrete column near the shoeshine stand at the base of the old staircase. He dragged the radio to safety with him behind the column. Another machine gun salvo blasted in. Mirrors shattered. Bottles exploded. Everything was vaporized, atomized, and liquefied in all directions. Vidal reloaded his submachine gun and several shotguns. He had lots of bullets left, and from behind the concrete column, he could shoot through 3 separate windows and 2 doors. He was an army of one, at least for today. He flipped through several stations on his radio until he found something useful. WAJH was airing an old Albizu Campos speech. Vidal played it at full volume. The reporters could hear it outside. Why do we even vote for these people? This year on election day, just stay in bed with your wife. By next year, Governor Luis Munoz Marin will make staying in bed on election day a felonious act, punishable by 10 years imprisonment. Vidal shot a .45 caliber ACP clip through the windows, firing 30 bullets in 3 bursts at full cyclic rate. Everyone outside ducked for cover. Then he hid behind the cement column and reloaded his submachine gun. If independence could be obtained with a cigarette in the mouth, a bottle of champagne, or walking with a good-looking girl, I would be the first to lie down here on the plaza and wait for independence drinking champagne. But independence is won with a gun. Sniper shouts bounced off the floor and ricocheted off the walls. The machine guns blasted chunks of cement, glass, and jagged wood through the air. Something sliced Vidal's cheek like a razor. He threw himself down, rolled across the floor, grabbed a shotgun by the center window, and fired straight at a police car as a photographer snapped a picture from across the street. For the past 50 years, the United States has been at war with Puerto Rico. They steal our land, sterilize our women, inject us with cancer and tuberculosis. They find traitors to rule over us, parasites who live by robbing their own people, hiding in castles where they drug themselves with morphine and drink rum continuously. A hail of bullets split a wall as a cloud of concrete dust engulfed the shop. Empires are devils disguised as guardian angels. The American flag is a skull and crossbones over 2 bunches of bananas.
That's a fact.
Democracy is a lady who presents herself with a machine gun between her legs, tear gas at her breast, and her hat adorned with pistols and .45 revolvers. The Salon Boricua was crumbling. Shrapnel flew everywhere. Flying glass and concrete hit Vidal again and again. Our country is past.
Thank you. Thanks for the gifts.
Puerto Ricans have to fight for their liberty with all arms at their disposal. We must fight for our own sanity. Because their propaganda is so complete that the only reality anymore is the one we create for ourselves. The battle raged for another hour. Vidal was shot 4 times and lost 3 fingers on his left hand. But like a man possessed, he fired ceaselessly from behind the cement column, the 3 main windows, and even the front door of the Salon Boricua. According to the Yankees, owning one person makes you a scoundrel, but owning a nation makes you a colonial benefactor. 40 detectives follow me around, even to the toilet. Everywhere you look, you see a Yankee army, navy, police, and Yankee courts. But one day our patience will end, because man is essentially free, and freedom is a force stronger than any empire on earth. A crowd gathered a block away on Callejon La Esperanza, and neighbors peeked cautiously through their window shades. A betting pool grew in El Machango regarding how many nationalists were in the salon and how long they'd be able to hold out. A few veteran journalists were already filing their stories and knocking back their Cuba Libres when a scruffy kid ran in to announce that Vidal was singing. Everyone rushed out to hear this latest development. Vidal was singing all right. A traditional Christmas aguinaldo, with a few new couplets thrown in. He punctuated each verse with a shot from his Colt pistol. Yo tengo una pistol. I have a pistol. Con manago de marfil. With a marble handle. Para matar todos los Yankees. To kill all the Yankees. Que vienen por ferrocarril.
F1 in the
who
comments.
come by railroad. The reporters started to laugh, especially when the National Guard lieutenant asked for a translation. His eyes widened considerably upon receiving it. When the reporters started cheering for Vidal, the soldiers decided they'd had enough. The lieutenant marched over to a field radio, spoke for a minute, and returned with his orders. It was time. They lit up the universe with hundreds of rounds. They blasted the building relentlessly. Bullets snapped all around Vidal's head, and he hit the floor repeatedly, cutting and abrading himself each time, his clothes torn to bits. He took a bullet in the ribs and saw his thumb vanish from his left hand. A chunk of cheekbone flew off and a splatter of red bone. And still he fought back, firing from behind the cement column, spraying .45 caliber ACP bullets all over the sidewalk, until the staircase collapsed and buried him in the rubble. Vidal heard a bell toll in La Iglesia del Espíritu Santo. He saw his father reading to the tobacco workers again, and his father waved. He saw the room where he was born, spotless with a little white sewing machine in the corner. Then he was gone. The soldiers didn't know this. They launched 3 canisters of tear gas, waited 2 or 3 minutes, then edged carefully toward the barber shop.
Really quick, to answer a question in the comment, what book is similar to this? If you're looking for like information, history in detailed of like Puerto Rican history and stuff, I would recommend Puerto Rico National History. They have that on Audible. We're probably going to do that in the next couple of books. But if you're looking for FBI files and more of like their literature, you got to give me a minute because I really got to think about that, because that's what makes this book so important and so interesting, is because this book is based off of the COINTEL profiles with the Freedom of Information Act that he acquired. So this is why I say I got to give me a second. Let me think about it. But Puerto Rico National History is a phenomenal book because it starts from the arrival of Columbus all the way until present time. And what I would correlate that book with is another book that I like, is called An American History, Cuba, which those 2 books side by side is phenomenal because there's a lot of intersectionalities, especially with geopolitics and even the conception of the United States and the participation of global efforts. So there's a lot of things, guys, when we come to books, history, knowledge, especially the intersectionalities of how we all in the situation and position that we're at today. But keep tapping that screen, keep sharing this live. I appreciate everybody for tapping in. We got about an hour and a half left of the book, so let's end this book out with a bang. Everybody on YouTube, tap that screen, stay active and positive. Everybody on TikTok, the same. Everybody on TikTok, if you could do me a favor, just shoot over to YouTube really quick, shoot me a subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell, so that way if I'm live, it'll give you a notification. But if you prefer to watch me on YouTube, TikTok now, that's no problem. But if you missed a session, go check out the YouTube, because everything that we're doing, all the books we do, every chapter is going to be in sequence on YouTube, and you can go backlog it and go visit it later on. Salute to everybody. Thanks for all the love and support. Let's get back into this.
B and the other reporters craned their heads to see what was going on inside. Everyone expected 20 or 30 nationalists to come staggering out, but none appeared.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
The lieutenant ordered his soldiers to gas the upstairs, and 3 more canisters sailed up to the 2nd floor.
And if you want to go deeper, right, another book that I would recommend, we just finished it, but we're probably gonna do it again later on because we just started the YouTube channel. But a Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez, which really goes over the United States and its meddling within what they deem Latin America, and showing that basically that quote that everyone has the same and equal opportunity is really not true. It's actually a crock of shit. Your opportunities in this country is based off the relationships and the geopolitical standings with the United States and other countries. And to be honest, a lot of those incentives are based off the manipulation of the geopolitical circumstances that the United States wants to be able to navigate in their favor. So, like I said, there's a lot of things to history and intersectionality. That's why I love bringing books and knowledge, because it's hard to go back and forth when you actually bring in historical content to light. So peace, blessings. Let's get to this. We got 5 minutes and 51 seconds of this chapter.
Made it through the windows. One landed on the balcony. Still, no one came out. At a signal from the lieutenant, 5 guardsmen in gas masks rushed in through the front door. 6 others covered them from either side of the 3 windows. The soldiers darted all around, ready to shoot anything that moved. But they found no nationalists. Just 4 walls spattered with blood, and a foot-high pile of rubble covering the entire floor. They searched for a rear exit or trap door, but found nothing. It was as if they'd been fighting a ghost. Then suddenly, from behind a concrete column, a soldier told them to come look. Vidal was covered in blood and broken glass. Not moving, apparently dead. But just to be sure, a soldier cleared the rubble off Vidal's head and shot him at point-blank range.
F1 in the
bullet
comments.
Exploded through Vidal's forehead and lodged in his brain. Que viva Puerto Rico, the soldier said in a southern accent, then dragged him out by the feet. The soldiers completed their reconnaissance and looked at each other in disbelief. It was a highly embarrassing scene. This tiny barber from Salon Boricua had held 40 armed men at bay. But then, as they hauled the corpse of Vidal Santiago into the street, things got even worse. The corpse opened its eyes. The soldiers gave a start and dropped Vidal on the sidewalk. One of them yelled, "Oh, Jesus!" Another yelled, "I thought you shot him!" A third ducked behind a car and started praying. The reporters started running in all directions, taking photos, grabbing their microphones, telling 2 million Puerto Ricans that Vidal Santiago was still alive.
Yeah, listen, let's get some F1s in the comments, and let's get some praying hands, guys. Listen to the level of violence they're willing to go. Just listen to that shit.
Police grabbed Vidal off the ground and smiled for a photo, as if they had caught a big fish. Then they threw him into an ambulance. It was 6 p.m. The battle had lasted 3 hours. People heard it in their homes, at work, and in their cars. They heard it in every town, hospital and school, in every pawn shop, barber shop, beauty salon and bodega. The governor heard it. The attorney general heard it. The prisoners in El Oso Blanco and La Princesa heard it. In just 3 hours, next to Albizu Campos, Vidal Santiago Diaz had become the most famous nationalist in Puerto Rican history. He was the barber who stood up to an empire with a bullet in his brain. Later that night, the soldiers cordoned off the area and searched for nationalist flyers, Puerto Rican flags, and other subversive material. They didn't speak much to the press. There had been enough embarrassment for one day. They found a few weapons, a broken radio, and dozens of celebrity headshots. The statue of Santa Barbara was still behind the shoeshine stand. The portraits of Vidal's father and El Águila Blanca had been placed carefully underneath her. The soldiers didn't find the panel in the bathroom, or the hidden basement next door. They gutted the entire barbershop and searched through the debris for clues. But by midnight, they still couldn't understand how one man, all alone, could have waged such a savage battle. It didn't seem human. The rubble hid a great mystery. 100 yards away, a man watched from a rooftop, hidden from view, recording every movement of the soldiers and police. He knew what they were seeking and understood everything that had occurred. But what he knew and understood didn't matter. The world wasn't ready to hear it. Vidal, a hero today, would be gone tomorrow. He was doomed to die a cipher in some vast statistical operation. The coroner would count his teeth, and the family might save some hair. But otherwise his death would be unknown, unhonored, and unremarked. He knew that Vidal existed, a man of substance, flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and a strong mind. But he was still invisible to El Norte because they refused to see him. They only saw his surroundings, or themselves, or figments of their own imagination. Anything and everything except Vidal. He knew some races were condemned to solitude, and Vidal's story would never get off the island. He knew the green light in front of the Salon Boricua had been broken on purpose. He knew that people were imprisoned by other people's habits, attitudes, defeats, boredom, quiet desperation, and muted, icy, self-destroying rage, and that this applied to nations as well. He knew the Ponce Massacre was not an isolated incident.
Nope.
He knew people were being interrogated, tortured, bombed, and killed. He knew his job was clear: to keep quiet and document it all, to keep the record intact, to pass it on to the next generation until someday the story could be told. That was good enough for him. The best an artist could hope for was to leave an honest account of himself, even if it was nothing more than a hanged man's right to the last word. And so, with a long zoom lens, Juan Emilio Villue filmed the soldiers as they swarmed over the street, fiddled with the dead green light, and picked over the bones of Salon Boricua.
Oh my God, guys, that's another heavy chapter. We almost there, guys. We got an hour and 29 minutes left of this book. So do me a favor, tap that screen, share this live. Don't forget that we are live on YouTube, guys. So if you guys missed the beginning portion of this live, you can go back and watch it later on. And if you missed the last couple of segments, don't worry, it's on YouTube, and you can go back and check out the archive from the beginning all the way into the end. Today will be the final day that we are doing War Against All Puerto Ricans by Nelson Dennis. So like I said, if you missed any of it, guys, don't worry, you'll be able to go on YouTube and be able to go recap everything we discussed about, everything we listened to. So let's keep going, guys. Keep tapping that screen, keep sharing this live, and again, please support my YouTube, guys. I'm trying to transfer the whole book club over to YouTube, so eventually I won't be doing the book club on TikTok anymore. I know it sucks, I know, but with the way I keep getting banned and blocked and put on timeout, I don't think it's fair to be able to, keep suppressing my viewers from my content because TikTok doesn't want knowledge and education on its platform. So if you guys could do me a favor, just jump over to hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, so that way we could be able to build our community. Tap the screen, let's keep it going. Oh, and don't forget, all gifts and donations will be going to the Young Lord Back to Puerto Rican project. The GoFundMe is in the bio on TikTok. The link is in the bio. So salute to everybody, guys. Let's get it.
Chapter 20. La Caja de Chinchas.
La Caja de Chinchas.
Immediately after the revolt, Governor Luis Muñoz Marin declared martial law throughout Puerto Rico. U.S. military personnel locked down entire towns, blocked roads, and searched cars. FBI agents, insular police, and National Guardsmen raided thousands of homes, searching for subversive materials in violation of Public Law 53, the gag law, including patriotic leaflets and Puerto Rican flags. And then came the arrests. Insular police officers arrested nationalists, nationalist sympathizers, and people who played dominoes with nationalists, or simply knew them. They arrested escaped convicts and accused them of being nationalists.
Listen.
The press blamed one nationalist, Juan Esteban Núñez Lara Quinte, for half the mayhem in Utuado, including burning down the post office, the telephone building, and the San Miguel Medical Clinic. El Imparcial noted in two different headlines, Arrestos en masa capturaron 32 de los
I don't know what happened.
Fugos. Further inspection proved the reports wrong. None of those buildings had caught fire. The governor and the Associated Press, AP, further alleged that the nationalists, as part of a communist conspiracy, had destroyed the town of Jayuya. In an article filed on October 31st, 1950, James Fowler, the AP correspondent in Puerto Rico, quotes the governor, calling the revolution a conspiracy against democracy, aided by the communists. It then states that the town of Jayuya was virtually destroyed by fire, and implies that the nationalists were responsible. The article contains no mention of the U.S. Thunderbolt airplanes that bombed and machine-gunned the town for several hours, leaving it in ruins. With martial law firmly in place, the wave of arrests grew. Soldiers arrested farmers and school teachers, men, women, and children. They dragged jibaros down from their mountain shacks. In the town of Jayuya, they yanked farmers off their plows and paraded them through the town streets. They arrested women alongside the farmers. A journalist named Ruth Reynolds, a school teacher named Olga Viscal, and a housewife named Carmen Perez were indicted for treason, attempted assassination, and conspiracy to overthrow the U.S. government. The table below lists a number of women arrested and the sentences they received. After the first 200 arrests in Jayuya, the National Guard commandeered several schools to hold all the prisoners. Some of them were children, imprisoned in their own schools. Name: Blanca Canales. Charges: burning the Jayuya post office. Sentence: life imprisonment. Prison: Alderson, West Virginia. In 1956, back to Vega Alta. Served 17 years. Name: Olga Viscal. Charges: violation of Public Law 53. 37 cases of contempt of court. Sentence: 1 to 10 years. 31 months. Prison: La Princesa, San Juan, and Arecibo District Jail. Name: Rosa Collazo. Charges: arrested, no charges. Sentence: 2 months. Prison: Women's Federal House of Detention, New York City. Name: Leonides Diaz. Charges: violation of Public Law 53. 4 charges of first-degree murder. 6 charges of intent to commit murder. Sentence: life without parole. 496 years. 7 years forced labor. Prison: Women's Prison in Vega Alta.
7 years forced labor.
Name: Juanita Ojeda. Charges: violation of Public Law 53.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's more names.
Sentence: 8 to 13 months. Prison: Arecibo District Jail. Name: Carmen Perez. Charges: attempted assassination. Sentence: 22 months. Prison: La Princesa, San Juan, and Arecibo District Jail. Name: Ruth Reynolds. Charges: violation of Public Law 53. Sentence: 2 to 6 years. Prison: La Princesa, San Juan, and Arecibo District Jail. Name: Isabel Rosado. Charges: violation of Public Law 53. Sentence: 1 year, 3 months. Prison: Humacao District Jail. Name: Carmen Torresola. Charges: arrested, no charges. Sentence: 2 months. Prison: New York City Women's Federal House of Detention, New York City. Name: Doris Torresola. Charges: violation of Public Law 53. Sentence: 10 years. Prison: La Princesa, San Juan District Jail. The Insular Police, the National Guard, and the FBI traveled together through dozens of towns. At the University of Puerto Rico campus in Rio Piedras, they arrested students on their way to class. Across the island, they arrested people on mere suspicion or accusation. They did not need warrants, evidence, or probable cause. They simply used a list of nationalists and tips to police. An informant who disliked someone, or owed him some money, or was interested in his wife, could simply denounce him as a nationalist and have him arrested. The list was so old and inaccurate that it included the Attorney General of Puerto Rico, the Mayor of Caguas, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, 4 city councilmen, and Governor Munoz Marin's wife, Inez. No matter. The list became the governor's excuse for arresting whomever he wanted. Terror coursed through every town. Anyone could be arrested at any time, day or night. Many were dragged from their beds. Some prisoners arrived in pajamas. The National Guard and Insular Police held them in custody without due process and without bail. In the San Juan area, the arrests continued around the clock. Citizens were lined up against concrete walls. U.S. troops pointed submachine guns and rifles at their heads. Still smarting from the assault on his own mansion, Governor Munoz Marin demanded additional U.S. troops in Puerto Rico and the use of Fort Buchanan to hold more prisoners. He salted this demand with a call to U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Oscar L. Chapman, to discuss the nationalist tie-in with a few communists on the island. Within a matter of days, over 3,000 people had been arrested throughout the island. In La Princesa alone, 350 inmates were moved to accommodate the tidal wave of nationalist prisoners. Another 300 were jammed into the Arecibo prison, and over 500 went to El Oso Blanco, the White Bear Penitentiary in Rio Piedras. After several long months, during which evidence and affidavits were created, the trials finally occurred, and they were severe. Here is one first-hand account. They took us to court. It was a clown show. We all knew the verdict beforehand. A prejudiced judge, a hand-picked jury, prosecutors with strict orders to send everyone to jail. We entered the room in handcuffs, and my father tried to hug me, but a policeman shoved him away. My father said, "God bless you, son." The trial lasted several weeks. The prosecutors presented even the bones of the policemen who had died in Jayuya. They called us traitors, assassins, subversives, every epithet they could think of. They threw the Puerto Rican flag around like a dish rag with no respect whatsoever. It was clear to everyone. The verdict had been decided from the start. We were all exhausted from this clown show. Finally, the jury came back. They told us to stand up, and Judge Padro Pares read the verdict with great ceremony. Guilty. We were all guilty of every charge. Murder, arson, assault, possession of arms. When he sentenced me, the judge looked me in the eye. He seemed angry at me. Heriberto Marin Torres, this honorable court sentences you to life imprisonment with hard labor, plus an additional 45 years to be served consecutively. I heard a commotion behind me. Someone had fainted. It was my mother. A marshal ran over, grabbed my arm, and ordered me not to move.
Let's tap the screen,
The judge
guys.
cleared everyone out of the courtroom. He did not appreciate my mother fainting. After everyone was sentenced, the judge smiled, and the prosecutors congratulated each other. They shook hands and looked at us with great contempt. After their sentencing and remand to La Princesa, El Oso Blanco, and other large penitentiaries, the nationalists received harsh treatment. Bright light bulbs shined in their cells 24 hours a day. They were given no sheets, towels, or toilet paper. No showers were allowed for 3 weeks. Visitors and correspondence were prohibited. The leaders were all placed in solitary confinement. At night, National Guardsmen would fire their weapons outside the nationalist cells. During the day, prisoners would have to ask these same men for permission to go to the bathroom. Their meals were often half-cooked rice, old bread, and wormy pig's feet. As time went on, out of sheer hunger, the nationalists would simply remove the worms. The case histories of these men and women read like chapters from the Gulag Archipelago. Their experiences, strip searches, cavity searches, sleep deprivation, starvation, isolation, and humiliation were engineered to destroy their dignity and break their spirits.
And this is the psychological warfare that we don't look at when we study history and we study government tactics to control the population. We only focus on the physical aspect, not understanding what that does to the mind, right? How that can affect the individual, just not now, but later on down the line as well. And when we talk about generational trauma, Shit. Imagine how that impacts someone's household or someone who's gone through things like that, and how that affects everyone around them. It's a lot.
One room in La Princesa, known as La Caja de Chinchas, the bedbug box, contained hundreds, perhaps thousands of bedbugs that had been allowed to multiply.
Listen.
The guards would remove a nationalist's shirt and throw him into La Caja. Immediately, the hungry bedbugs would assault him, crawling onto him from the walls or dropping off the ceiling. At first, the nationalist would wage war, crushing them on his body and against the walls, suffocated by their stink. But after several hours, he would weaken and let them drink his blood without a murmur. The psychological warfare was equally relentless. 2 months after his arrest, with no charges yet filed against him, Heriberto Marin Torres had received great news. He was being set free from La Princesa. He distributed his meager possessions, said his tearful goodbyes, and headed for the warden's office, where several FBI men were waiting for him. They told him his mother's health was shaky, but that his release would probably revive her. And if he told the FBI everything he knew, i.e. informed on all his cellmates, he could go free immediately. Marin Torres said nothing. Justo Guzman Serrano's mother died. The U.S. Department of Justice prohibited him from attending her burial. The funeral procession passed right by the prison, and the pallbearers knew that Justo was there, so everyone kept quiet. And in that silence, Justo shouted, "Goodbye, Mom." Then he buried his face in his hands. Gregorio Hernandez Rivera, Goyito, was the only surviving nationalist from the attack on La Fortaleza. He'd lost several fingers, and a dozen bullets had pockmarked his body. Once the wounds healed, he was thrown in solitary. Over a year later, he was finally allowed his first visit. He hugged and kissed his wife and asked about their 2-year-old daughter. Hadn't he gotten her telegram? She asked. The girl had died a few months before. The prison had thrown away the telegram. Deus Dedit Marrero, a social worker, had played no part in the revolt. He was arrested for being a socialist, not exactly a nationalist, but close enough, and convicted of attempting to overthrow the U.S. government, even though he was at work during the entirety of the revolt and was leaving behind a pregnant wife. The brutality of these charges ultimately drove him insane. When he discovered that his wife had committed suicide, Deus Dedit killed himself.
F1 in the comments.
Ricardo Diaz was arrested for being a member of a revolutionary family. The guards ridiculed him mercilessly, trying to goad him into violence or suicide. Unable to contrive any evidence against him, they released him after 7 months. Francisco Matos Paoli was arrested for having a Puerto Rican flag in his house and sentenced to 20 years. The warden knew that Paoli was the Secretary General of the Nationalist Party and a prolific poet, so he inflicted an evil punishment. He deprived Paoli of paper and writing utensils. To the warden's chagrin, Paoli always found a pencil or two and covered his prison walls with poems. He even managed to write on the ceiling. Years later, in 1977, Matos Paoli was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature. U.S. Army doctors conducted medical experiments at La Princesa. 2 or 3 times a week, they visited the Hospitalito, the medical clinic, and persuaded healthy prisoners to take new experimental drugs for tropical diseases. They paid these prisoners with cartons of cigarettes. The treatments would last several months, and when the prisoners died, the cause of death would be listed as atrial fibrillation or myocardial infarction, heart attack. The experimental drugs were never mentioned. The army doctors persuaded Hector, an orderly at the Hospitalito, to take some new pills for bilharzia, even though he was not afflicted with this. Within a few days, Hector started to vomit. His stool became bloody, and his liver became inflamed. The pain was excruciating. Governor Muñoz Marin commuted his sentence, and he went home. 1 week later, his mother found him dead. the most extreme medical experiment of all, was revealed on the floor of the United Nations and reported around the world. A great cloud of mystery still surrounds it.
Let's tap that screen, guys. Let's tap that screen. We got an hour and 13 minutes left of this book. I appreciate all the love and support here on TikTok and YouTube. Everybody on TikTok, don't forget to go subscribe over there on YouTube. It's the same name, AfroTaino88. Without further ado, because I don't want to drag it out any longer. We got an hour and 13 left. Let's get right through it.
Chapter 21. Atomic Lynching. At 3 a.m. on November 1st, 1950, while everyone slept, Pedro Albizu Campos, president of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party and leader of the 1950 revolt against the United States, was transferred to La Princesa. A dozen insular police surrounded the van as it glided quietly up to the Hospitalito, while another dozen police officers lined the path to the door, all armed with rifles. In absolute silence, the officers slipped the man through a side door and the van drove away with its lights off, so quickly and quietly that the only sounds were coquí, tree frogs, and the ocean waves of San Juan Harbor. The officers led Albizu to a specially outfitted cell in solitary, then calmly resumed their rounds. The cell, backed by a bolted, unmarked room that everyone assumed to be a storage closet, was close to the Hospitalito. It had 4 walls with no window, no ventilation, and an overflowing pail that served as his latrine. The stench was heavy and pervasive. He remained in isolation there for 6 months, with no visitors or access to lawyers, a telephone, or writing instruments. A couple of months after his arrival, in early 1951, strange rumors began to circulate around the prison. A death machine, designed and installed by a mad scientist, a U.S. Army doctor, or worse, Joseph Mengele himself, up from Argentina, could send death rays through the walls of La Princesa and kill prisoners while they slept. It was a ridiculous idea, but the warden would interrogate anyone who asked the guards about it, then send them off to solitary. Albizu's trial started in August 1951. He was convicted on August 15th and sentenced to life on August 29th. But before his trial, before he'd seen a lawyer, while he was still trapped in that airless cement block, strange things began to happen. On February 18th, 6 months before his trial, odd lights somehow penetrated the concrete walls of his cell. He saw ribbons of light on all the walls, in all colors, brilliant as the aurora borealis. Sometimes it looked like a cascade of melted gold. Then, for the first time in his life, he passed out. When he regained consciousness, he had a splitting headache and what felt like a full-body sunburn. The next day, the lights returned, and so did his headache. The lights never stopped after that. Only their intensity varied. Even when there was no visible light, he could still feel the rays. After a week, he noticed that each wave of radiation swelled his legs, his hands, his head, and whatever other part of the body it hit, after only 4 minutes. Since Albizu was in complete isolation, he was unable to communicate this to anyone. 3 months later, when he was finally allowed to write, Albizu sent a letter to the warden of La Princesa, Juan S. Bravo, on May 10th, 1951. It went unanswered. By May 29th, he had written 4 more letters, still receiving no response from the warden. Instead, on May 12th, 16th, 19th, 21st, and 22nd, a succession of 5 doctors and 2 psychiatrists examined him. Although they saw the burn marks and found arterial hypertension, high blood pressure, they ignored these and reported that Albizu suffered from an interpretive psychosis of injury and danger, overtones of paranoia, and hallucinations of all his 5 senses. In short, they deemed him insane. In a memo fired off to U.S. Attorney General J. Howard McGrath, Secretary of the Interior Oscar L. Chapman, Chief of the Secret Service U.E. Baum, the Pentagon, the Treasury Department, and the Office of Naval Intelligence, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover gloated that Albizu complains of North Americans shooting cosmic rays into his head, of being attacked by certain luminous rays which he alleged were part of an electronic experiment being conducted by the U.S. Army, of feeling lame due to the rays, and of suffering from continuous severe headaches. Later, in June 1951, Hoover sent out another memo containing the medical report of Dr. Troyano de los Rios, the psychiatrist of the Insular Department of Prisons. The cause of his paranoia is an intense urge to be something which he is not, an inferiority complex. Hoover neglected to mention in these memos that other prisoners in La Princesa were reporting the same radiation as Albizu. At the doctor's suggestion, 2 prisoners named Robert Diaz and Juan Jaca Hernandez were temporarily moved into Albizu's cell, and almost immediately they started complaining of headaches and radiation burns. Warden Bravo switched a second group of prisoners into Albizu's cell, and they wrote a letter on June 7, 1951, complaining of electronic rays, black rays, and white emanations that were causing burns to the chest, stomach, and ankles.
Listen, guys.
3 women in La Princesa, Ruth Reynolds, Doris Torresola, and Carmen Perez, also reported humming motors, vibrations, and electric shocks directed at their heads while they slept.
Mind you, all these different individuals are telling you what they experience, and the government is quick to tell them that they're off, that they're crazy, right? In a second, I'm about to show you a picture of Pedro Albizu Campos when he came out of prison, and you tell me if what he says was crazy.
As of October 1951, Albizu was allowed an extremely limited visitation. 1 visit every 2 weeks for half an hour.
Listen.
The visitors were usually his sister, Ana Maria Campos, his lawyer, Juan Hernandez Valle, or a family friend. A few months later, despite Warden Bravo's efforts to keep the story quiet, it exploded throughout Latin America.
Listen up.
An El Mundo article headlined, "Albizu Campos alleges that they are directing light rays at him," reported that his blood pressure had risen to 220/120, that he could scarcely walk, and that he had suffered atomic torture.
Listen.
El Imparcial reported that Albizu's feet, chest, and stomach were severely inflamed, and the muscles in his neck were infected. In Argentina, the magazine Verdad, Truth, put Albizu on its front cover and ran an article headlined, "The Atomic Lynching of a Martyr for Liberty," which stated that the apostle of Puerto Rican liberty is slowly being murdered in jail by means of electronic rays.
Listen.
In Mexico, the magazine Correo Indoamericano charged, "Fatal rays are being used against Albizu Campos." The daily newspaper Tiempo en Cuba, Time in Cuba, reported that Albizu was the victim of a scientific plan to induce cerebral hemorrhage, cardiac collapse, or both, and that these attacks were producing visible burns on his extremities, swelling of his face, and a severe choking around the neck. The article concluded dramatically, "God knows that this is a lynching at the height of the atomic age."
Listen.
The journalist, Teofilo Maldonado, was allowed to visit Albizu on September 23, 1953. On another occasion, Cuban journalist Vicente Cubillas received permission to visit. He wrote a detailed eyewitness account. His head is covered by 2 wet towels. His neck rests on a bag of ice, and around his neck he has another bag with cold water. Over his heart are 2 handkerchiefs soaked in ice water, and his belly and legs are under wet blankets. The sheets and mattress are also soaked with water. His body is smothered with cold cream and pomodoro pomade. The electronic attack is blinding and burning, and protection can be obtained only by the use of towels and sheets wetted in ice water. Due to the mounting concern throughout Latin America, the Cuban government requested that Albizu be transferred out of La Princesa. On May 28, 1951, the Cuban House of Representatives passed a resolution stating, "The House of Representatives of Cuba, taking into consideration the very grave state of the Puerto Rican patriot, Dr. Pedro Albizu Campos, declares that the conditional liberty of Dr. Pedro Albizu Campos can be obtained, and he can be transferred to the Republic of Cuba to attend to his cure.
Listen.
On December 19, 1952, a petition filed on behalf of Albizu in the General Assembly of the United Nations denounced his torture in La Princesa and demanded his extradition to a territory outside the United States. The petition was supported by the personal testimony of Dr. Frederick Joliot-Curie, a winner of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his discovery of artificial radioactivity, that the technology for total body irradiation was in existence, and that such attacks were possible. After review by the FBI, the Secretary of the Interior, the Department of Justice, the Secret Service, and the intelligence agencies of the U.S. Armed Forces, the petition was denied. In 1953, the International Writers' Congress of José Martí sent a letter to President Dwight D. Eisenhower on behalf of Albizu and the nationalist prisoners. 28 prominent writers, journalists, and intellectuals from 11 countries signed it. The letter was ignored. Later that year, Dr. Orlando Daumí, president of the Cuban Cancer Association and an expert on radiation, examined Albizu. Dr. Daumí found that 1. The sores on Albizu Campos were produced by radiation burns.
Facts.
2. His symptoms corresponded to those of a person who had received intense radiation.
Facts.
And 3. Wrapping himself in wet towels had been the best way to diminish the intensity of the radiation.
Facts.
Due to all this international pressure, Albizu Campos received a brief release from La Princesa on September 30th, 1953, until March 6th, 1954. In November 1953, Carmen Perez, Doris Torresola, and Isabel Rosado Morales came to Albizu's house at 156 Calle Sol, the same house where he'd been arrested in 1950, and witnessed an alarming physical phenomenon. They approached Albizu with a Geiger counter that registered 4 to 9 clicks per minute upon entering his room, and 14 when close to the man himself. When they placed the probe near Albizu's body, the needle jumped wildly, and the entire apparatus broke.
Listen.
The FBI reports sent directly to J. Edgar Hoover acknowledged that Albizu was physically incapacitated with body swellings, that he had more bluish marks appearing on his body, fever and pain, high blood pressure, headaches and swellings on his legs, that he was in such bad health that he can scarcely walk, that he was very ill and sinking fast, and that he might not recover from his present illness. Despite all this, for 5 years, 1951 to 1956, nothing was done about Albizu Campos's medical condition. The United States kept sending teams of psychiatrists to his cell, all of whom declared him insane. Albizu repeatedly requested that a radiologist or nuclear physicist examine him, to no avail. Over and over, he stated that the radiation was intended to induce either a stroke or a heart attack. In December 1952, he reported to the Organization of American States that he expected to suffer heart failure or cerebral hemorrhage. And that is precisely what happened. In a stunning admission, an internal FBI report states that Albizu suffered a cerebral thrombosis in prison on March 27, 1956, and was moved to Presbyterian Hospital on March 29th. In other words, after suffering a major stroke, Albizu did not receive proper medical attention for 2 full days. The result was predictable. For the rest of his life, the right side of Albizu's body was paralyzed. He was never able to speak again. Albizu Campos had been silenced forever.
Yeah, that chapter hits so hard. Can I get some candles, some praying hands emojis down below, some hearts? You know, this is a heavy chapter. We almost done with the book, guys. We got 59 minutes left. 15. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you for the gifts. We got 59 minutes left. Let's keep tapping that screen. Let's keep sharing this live. Everybody on TikTok, don't forget we are also live on YouTube. So if you miss most of the live, you'll be able to go backtrack on the backlog and go catch up to where we at. Salute to everybody. Let's keep it going. On YouTube, it's AfroTaino88, the same way it's here on TikTok, guys. Let's keep it going. Salute to everybody on YouTube. Y'all showing me mad love and support. I love the positive vibrations in the comments below. Let's keep it going, guys.
Chapter 22. Weird Science in Puerto Rico. There is a great deal at stake in determining whether the U.S. government irradiated Pedro Albizu Campos. If it did not, then one might conclude that he was insane, which would substantiate the logic of the U.S. government, that no one in his or her right mind would wish for Puerto Rican independence. If, on the other hand, Albizu was irradiated, then the U.S. government acted with scientific savagery, using physics and mathematics for the purpose of assassination, burning defenseless prisoners alive in their cells. A conclusive, irrefutable determination of Albizu's radiation claim is impossible, since the U.S. government maintained complete dominion over Albizu's body and controlled all access to it, and FBI reports contain the only written records about that body. Despite these limitations, a reasonable analysis is still possible, especially given facts that began to surface in the mid-1980s. In November 1986, Congressman Edward Markey delivered a report to the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, titled American Nuclear Guinea Pigs, 3 Decades of Radiation Experiments on U.S. Citizens. It covered 695 people exposed to radiation in 31 experiments sponsored by the U.S. Army and the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, some in the 1940s and 1950s. In many instances, the government covered up the nature of the experiments after the subjects died.
So long story short, everything that those inmates were experiencing, that they was calling them crazy, were actually telling the truth. 365, they said?
These victims included 131 prisoners at Oregon and Washington state prisons, whose testicles were irradiated with X-rays during a 10-year study between 1963 and 1973. The levels reached 600 roentgens per exposure at 2-week intervals, though the safe level of testicular exposure is only 5 roentgens per year. In other medical studies during 1943 and 1944, people underwent total body irradiation, TBI, with no prior disclosure about the dangers of X-rays. This was only the start. In August 1995, the U.S. Department of Energy dropped a bombshell, announcing that federally supported radiation experiments had used up to 20,000 men, women, and children between World War II and the mid-1970s.
Listen.
Some 435 confirmed experiments used children, mental patients, mentally disabled people, and prison inmates. In many cases, these individuals were exposed to lethal beams of radiation and then died. In 12 secret Cold War experiments, atomic weapons researchers released thousands of times the radiation that would be considered safe today. In the worst cases, the experiments were kept secret from the public and the victims themselves in order to avoid liability or embarrassment to the government. In one cynical study, mentally disabled children at the Walter E. Fernald State School in Waltham, Massachusetts, were told they were joining a science club and fed radioactive materials in their cereals for 10 years, 1946 to 1956. All this exposure, combined with aggressive journalism, forced the U.S. Department of Energy to pay $4.8 million to bereaved family members in an effort to make amends for the many unethical government-sponsored radiation experiments carried out by government doctors, scientists, and military officials from 1944 to 1974 on as many as 20,000 people. The case for Albizu. It is not certain, but it is possible that Albizu Campos was one of the 20,000 people subjected to radiation experimentation.
What's the possibilities that he was not one of those individuals, knowing that he was the biggest threat to the United States government? What's the possibilities, guys? Hmm?
It is not certain, but it is possible, that Albizu endured TBI for 5 years. FBI reports repeatedly mentioned visually apparent physical signs. There is no dispute that he exhibited swollen legs, sores on his legs, arms, and torso, bluish marks on his skin, facial and neck swelling, raw peeling skin on his hands and feet, high blood pressure, 220/110. These conditions persisted throughout his incarceration from 1951 until his stroke in March 1956. In addition, Albizu complained of continuous severe headaches that were most intense after the alleged radiation attacks. A January 21st, 1954 FBI radiogram sent directly to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover stated, "A Cuban doctor visited Albizu in November 1953, and upon returning to Cuba has declarations about Albizu's case that he will place before the next International Congress of Doctors. Identity of Cuban doctor unknown." This same radiogram continues. "A sample of matter from a blister on subject's, Albizu's leg, was shown or sent to a Mexican doctor, who stated there was no doubt it was caused by some sort of electronic or radioactive emanation." It concludes, "New York and Chicago are requested to obtain from informants any information assisting identification of Cuban or Mexican physicians who are alleged contacts of subject." The bottom of the radiogram contained an instruction from Hoover. "If the intelligence contained in the above message is to be distributed outside the Bureau, it is suggested that it be suitably paraphrased." Another FBI radiogram instructed the New York and Chicago offices to furnish any available information, identity of alleged group of experts, and furnish plans of any doctors or experts to visit Albizu in Puerto Rico. Thus, rather than attempting to identify the organic causes of Albizu's illness, the U.S. government was conducting clandestine surveillance of any doctors who independently tried to diagnose his condition. This surveillance reached epic proportions with regard to Dr. Nassim Hanoka. An FBI memo to J. Edgar Hoover stated, "Subject Albizu is seeking medical attention from physicians who are alleged authorities on radiation." The memo indicated that mail intercepted at Albizu's home showed a letter from a Dr. Hanoka in Miami Beach, Florida. The memo ended with an instruction. "The Miami office is requested to identify Dr. Hanoka, determine whether he made a trip to Puerto Rico since 9/30/53, and furnish any subversive information concerning him." The FBI then unleashed a spectacular investigation into Dr. Hanoka.
Listen
A
up.
search through records at the Miami Beach Police Department, the Miami Police Department, the Dade County Sheriff's Office, and the Miami Municipal Court found no criminal history for him. A credit bureau search showed that he had an income in excess of $8,000, $71,000 in current dollars, per year. A pretext inquiry showed that Hanoka was living in 12 Dongan Place in New York City, the Washington Heights section, and had a winter address at 42 Collins Avenue in Miami. A file search in Kansas City and Chicago showed that a Dr. N. Hanoka had resided at 215 South Kedzie Avenue in Chicago, then 300 West 42nd Street in New York, before moving to 12 Dongan Place. A search of Immigration and Naturalization Service records showed that, pursuant to petition number 148314, Nassim Samuel Hanoka had also lived at 65 West 117th Street, and was born in Turkey on Three Kings Day, January 6th, in 1886. Another credit bureau search revealed that Dr. Hanoka had resided not at 300, but at 340 West 42nd Street. A letter from the Inspector in Charge, Law Division, U.S. Department of Labor Immigration Service, Office of the Commissioner of Immigration at Ellis Island, requested information concerning one Dr. Nassim Hanoka, an alleged communist. A profile of the doctor ultimately revealed that he was white, slender, and balding, with a dark complexion, brown eyes, and graying black hair. He stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighed 150 pounds, and wore glasses part-time. He was an intelligent talker, indicating extensive travel, and a retired dentist who claimed to have performed dental work for Pandit Nehru. His one peculiarity: he was a vegetarian. This manic investigation of Dr. Hinoka was more than a waste of energy and taxpayer dollars. It clearly indicates government efforts to prevent access to Albizu Campos, particularly by doctors trying to diagnose his illness. In early 1951, another doctor entered the picture. In February and March, Dr. Marshall Brewster, director of the medical division of the Oak Ridge Institute for Nuclear Studies, ORINS, visited Puerto Rico. He met with several farmers and University of Puerto Rico administrators to create a radioactive fertilizer study on Puerto Rican coffee plantations. The declassified FBI records for Albizu Campos omit the period of Dr. Brewster's visit to the island, which coincides exactly with Albizu's first report of radiation in his cell. ORINS was the primary U.S. facility for the construction and operation of TBI chambers. It built the first state-of-the-art medium exposure rate total body irradiator, METBI, and the first low exposure rate total body irradiation chamber, LETBI, and used them to irradiate nearly 200 people over almost 15 years. The U.S. Army and National Aeronautics and Space Administration both provided extensive funding for ORINS to study the effects of single, repeated, and protracted doses of radiation on human subjects. These studies used both the METBI and LETBI chambers. ORINS also conducted the first 3 field tests in radiological warfare for the U.S. Department of Defense. In this murk of coincidence, missing FBI documents, and TBI chambers, another coincidence developed. In the early 1950s, the Special Weapons Agency of the U.S. Department of Defense awarded the Sloan Kettering Institute in New York a multi-million-dollar contract to study post-irradiation syndrome in humans. From 1945 until 1959, the director of the Sloan Kettering Institute was Dr. Cornelius P. Rhodes, who was also a consultant to the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. Rhodes's name even appears in the contract documents for this post-irradiation syndrome study. As discussed earlier in this book, Albizu had hounded Rhodes out of Puerto Rico after Rhodes wrote an infamous letter about killing 8 Puerto Ricans and transplanting cancer into several more.
Listen up.
Finally, in terms of doctors and medical care, the fact that Albizu had a severe stroke but was denied medical attention for at least 2 full days speaks volumes about the hostile environment in which he was imprisoned. A great deal of evidence, both direct and circumstantial, supports Albizu Campos's claim that he was subjected to TBI. Let us now consider the U.S. government's argument against it. The case against Albizu. Albizu Campos claims he is being irradiated. Therefore, he is crazy. That's the entirety of the federal government's position. The United States neither investigated the matter nor provided a radiologist or nuclear physicist to examine Albizu. To the contrary, it unleashed the FBI on any doctor who dared to inquire about his health, or even to send him a letter. For 5 years, a caravan of paid psychiatrists conducted the only U.S. medical inquiry. They conducted no tests and provided no answers with respect to the burns and lesions all over Albizu's body, which journalists throughout the Western Hemisphere had repeatedly witnessed, photographed, and reported. The U.S. government simply denied the physical evidence and declared Albizu Campos insane. In 1994, Albuquerque Tribune reporter Eileen Wellsome won the Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting for her 3-part expose on the government-sponsored radiation experiments from 1944 to 1974. She later published a book titled The Plutonium Files, in which she concluded the following.
Listen.
The U.S. federal government conducted hundreds of secret radiation experiments on its own people. Thousands of Americans were used as laboratory animals in these radiation experiments,
Listen up.
funded by the federal government. The radiation experiments revealed a deliberate intent, a willingness to inflict harm. The TBI procedures caused intense suffering and premature death. A web of deception and denial enabled the experiments to continue for decades. 35 years after Albizu Campos's death, his FBI files were declassified, finally lifting a veil of secrecy.
Listen.
The physical evidence overwhelmingly indicates that Albizu was trapped in this web of deception and denial, and irradiated over an extended period. No physical evidence to the contrary has been found, not in the FBI files or the medical records or anywhere else. It is difficult to escape the conclusion that Albizu was one of 20,000 U.S. citizens treated as little more than lab rats. In Albizu's case, it finally killed him. As one newspaper headline blared, "Piden investigar la muerte de Albizu Campos."
Whew, we almost there, guys. We almost there. We got 44 minutes. Let's end this live with a bang. Let's try to get to our goals. Let's shoot for 15K on TikTok, and let's tap it over here on YouTube. Again, everybody on TikTok, if you haven't already subscribed, please jump onto the YouTube channel, go subscribe, hit the notification bells, because if you missed anything, you can always go back into the archives and go re-listen to a show that you missed out. Without further ado, let's finish out. We got 44 minutes and 39 seconds left. Let's get it.
Chapter 23.
The
King of the Towels. By June 1951, La Princesa was overflowing again. A second wave of nationalists flooded in as their trials and sentencings were completed. Pedro Albizu Campos and over 50 patriots were given life imprisonment. Some received 400-year sentences. The sentences handed down across the island totaled over 16,000 years. A headline appeared in the Daily Worker: "Albizu Campos jailed on Wall Street's order." As political prisoners, the nationalists were treated severely. Whenever a large group arrived, over 100 escort guards and National Guardsmen would encircle the transport van and create an armed gauntlet into the prison. The nationalists were surrounded by machine guns and rifles pointed in their faces, and dozens of snarling dogs. They were ushered into a rectangular stone building and taken to a large room, where the floor was covered with filthy water a few inches deep, and ordered to undress. As the nationalists removed each item of clothing, the guards would grab it, search it, and throw it in the water. Then the guards commanded the prisoners to put on the filthy wet clothes. In this condition they were processed, played the piano, had their fingerprints taken, and were assigned to their galerias, galleries. Built for 100 prisoners, the galerias were packed with over 4 times that many. There were no exercise periods. There was no bedding or privacy. No prisoner was left alone for a single moment, not even to sleep. Spiked cuffs cut into their skin until their hands became swollen and numb. They ate rice and beans every day. At night, a legion of ants and bedbugs bit their flesh. Watches and timepieces were all confiscated. They were allowed no letters, newspapers, or contact with the outside world. Anyone who asked to see a lawyer was thrown into solitary confinement. The nationalist leaders were all in solitary until the warden decreed that they were no longer a threat. Albizu Campos was in a special dungeon at the far end of the calabozos, solitary cells. The prisoners in adjacent cells kept changing every week. They all behaved very strangely. He was sure they were spying on him, goading him to insanity, or both. To his left, Kano was tattooed with a close pattern of African flora and fauna: elephants and lions, baboons and strange birds with enormous beaks. A magnificent human eye was etched at the base of his throat. Kano called it the Eye of the Police. To his right, Eliezer scratched on the wall day and night, thinking his mother was next door, in Albizu's cell, dying. His fingers bled, literally worn to the bone. A tooth fell out of Albizu's mouth. He was developing scurvy.
Listen.
His gums were bleeding, His legs were purple and black. In the absence of ventilation or a window, his own body heat and breathing raised the temperature in his tiny cell to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. He covered himself with wet towels and walked the length of the cell. 5 steps, back and forth. Life had turned him into a pendulum. It had all been mathematically worked out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. He had to keep moving, to keep his blood flowing, his lungs full, his joints hydrated, to keep his body from shutting down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. He might never leave this room. He recalled the sunsets over Ponce, the smiles of old Aunt Rosa, the gaslit streets with the Sereno, town crier, proclaiming that it was 11 p.m. and all was well. He remembered so many faces, voices, cries and whispers, and said goodbye to them all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. He remembered a tiny green light on the far side of the Rio Bucana. He gazed at it often during his childhood, in the vast obscurity beyond the city. The twinkling light had given him hope, a feeling that if he ran faster or stretched his arms further, there was still a dream somewhere, so close he could hardly fail to grasp it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. He heard a sudden cry, an anguished wail of despair inside his cell. What was it? The death of a dream? Had it come from him? It sounded like a man being tortured or going mad. It was so easy in these cells, where nothing ever happened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. His face grew dark, and his skin began to peel. His head was bloating. Ulcers grew on his legs. Blue-black warts covered his arms, his thighs, even his scrotum. Albizu was rotting alive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. He knew what they were doing to other nationalists, feeding them worms, burying them in bedbugs, keeping them on their feet sleepless for 3 days, interrogating them in a room with a bloody carpet, arresting...
Yo, it's just... And these are the parts when people read this book that really hits them. It's like... the level of torture, the level of degrading individuals. All in the name of what? World domination? World control?
And threatening their families, all in the name of freedom and democracy. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yo, salute to all our revolutionary leaders. Salute to all of them, because when you stand up for something, and you really an influential individual, and you can really make a fucking difference, these are the levels that they're willing to put you through and willing to go through to be able to shut that shit down. So salute to all our revolutionary leaders, because someone's revolution might be a government's T word. That's what you got to understand. The propaganda and the levels of atrocity they're willing to go to without taking accountability.
5, and turned. La Princesa was killing them all, bit by bit, dissolving their spirit to feces and ash. The highest levels of science and lowest levels of government had joined to create a monster. It stole your youth, health, and humanity. It claimed your house and land and body, and finally even your mind. It was a malignant cancer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. The cancer threw a hidden leash on your neck and cheated you from birth until the overcharge on your coffin. The cancer needed wealth, created by other men, poor men, landless men, sweaty men, greasy men, men soaked with fever, men blinded by physical misery, men who'd fallen out of the present, whose past was surrounded by barbed wire, whose future was owned and operated by the cancer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. They'd turned him into a dead man, a lonely ghost uttering a truth that nobody would ever hear. Albizu had learned to accept it. He knew that people died every day. They'd been squeezed empty, left hollow, then filled with the cancer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. He had no property, no position, no future, nothing except the few cubic centimeters inside his skull. But the cancer and its operatives wanted that too. If they couldn't own it, they would destroy it with surgical precision and scientific savagery. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. It seemed that owning one man made you a scoundrel, but owning an entire nation made you a colonial benefactor. The air thickened. It started to rain. If it rained 40 days and 40 nights, he wondered, would it be enough to wash humanity's sins away?
Would it?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. A storm raged outside. Mosquitoes swarmed in and bit Albizu's neck, as if blaming him for it. A rat scuttled up the wall and out of the cell, carrying some urgent message, no doubt. Yes, Albizu would never leave this room. It had been conceived the moment he was born, engineered specifically for him, and he could only leave it in pieces, bit by bit, in the mouths of the rats that bit him and the insects that sucked his blood. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. He walked through life with a revolution inside his head, a vision of man and woman, an island left in peace, a Garden of Eden without the cancer. But the vision was dying in a holocaust of strange science. It was burning in a man-made inferno. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. It was impossible to found a civilization on fear and hatred and cruelty. It would never endure. It would have no vitality. It would disintegrate. It would commit suicide. In killing Albizu, they were ultimately killing themselves. But they were too young to know this. The lesson would have to age and mature, like a fine wine in a forgotten cellar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. Each baby step brought him closer to an appointed end. In the last days, in those final moments, he never once betrayed his dream. He carried it with dignity, proclaimed it with his heart, and protected it with wet towels. The government called him a terrorist. The doctors declared him insane. The guards laughed in his face and called him King of the Towels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn. The government got it wrong. Pedro Albizu Campos was the conscience of his people. They killed his body, but forgot his voice, and it echoes across all borders from one century to the next. Albizu was a champion of freedom, a prophet, a piercing light. a fallen soldier in the war against all Puerto Ricans.
I'm not gonna lie, guys. My eye is twitching. That's how aggravated I am. I'm trying to hold it in over here, but it's like giving me that. But listen, guys, we're almost done. Salute to everybody tapping in with us. We're also live on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube at AfroTaino88. The same way it's written here on TikTok is the same way it's written there on YouTube. So if you guys want to be able to go recap and catch the beginning of the book all the way until now, because we're ending out the book right now, you can definitely go back and check the archives out. But without further ado, because we got the last half an hour, the last 32 minutes, let's get right into it. I'm going to go check on my food because I've been here for almost 2 hours and change with you guys, and I'm hungry.
On December 11th, 1964, shortly before Pedro Albizu Campos's death, Ernesto Che Guevara spoke before the United Nations General Assembly on his behalf. He said, "Albizu Campos is a symbol of the as yet unfree but indomitable Latin America. Years and years of prison, almost unbearable pressures in jail, mental torture, solitude, total isolation from his people and his family, the insolence of the conqueror and its lackeys in the land of his birth. Nothing broke his will." Albizu Campos died on April 21st, 1965. His family received hundreds of telegrams, cables, and letters from around the world. Both the Senate and House of Representatives of Puerto Rico commemorated him, and the Venezuelan Parliament observed 5 minutes of silence in his memory. Government officials, journalists, and friends from every country in Latin America arrived to attend the funeral services. For 3 days before Albizu's burial on April 25th, over 100,000 people passed his open casket, and 75,000 black mourning ribbons were distributed throughout the island. The life, torture, and death of Albizu Campos were the direct, nearly inevitable result of American foreign policy and an ongoing flaw in the American character. The broken body of Albizu throws a spotlight on the fault lines that run through our national psyche. These fault lines had long been apparent. Centuries of slavery and Native American genocide contradicted the bromide, "all men are created equal." After the annexation of most of Mexico's territory, President Theodore Roosevelt boldly declared, "It was inevitable and in the highest degree desirable for the good of humanity at large that Americans ultimately crowd out the Mexicans. It was out of the question to expect Texans to submit to the mastery of the weaker race." Applying this weaker race philosophy to Latin America, Roosevelt added, "It is manifest destiny for a nation to own the islands which border its shores. If any South American country misbehaves, it should be spanked." Much like the British imperial doctrine of the white man's burden, the American notion of a manifest destiny rested on a belief in the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race and its right to rule the Western Hemisphere. President William Howard Taft candidly proclaimed this right in 1912. "The whole hemisphere will be ours, in fact, as, by virtue of our superiority of race, it already is ours morally." This theme of racial superiority reached ludicrous heights on the floor of the U.S. Senate in April 1900, when a legislator warned that Puerto Ricans were savages, hostile to Christianity, incapable of self-government, and addicted to headhunting and cannibalism. As late as 1940,
We're hostile to Christianity because look what the Vatican done. The Vatican kicked that shit off. A lot of the atrocities that happened with colonization wouldn't have happened without the help of the church. So if you understand why people push back against religious beliefs or religious indoctrination, is because it has us where we're at today. It set the whole shit off.
commentators stated, "All Puerto Ricans are totally lacking in moral values, which is why none of them seem to mind wallowing in the most abject moral degradation."
I hear that.
Naturally, this U.S. moral superiority served as a prelude to plunder. In 1912, The Cayamel Banana Company, a U.S. corporation, orchestrated the military invasion of Honduras to obtain hundreds of thousands of acres of Honduran land and tax-free export of its entire banana crop. By 1928, the United Fruit Company...
Yeah, I want you guys to go look up the Banana Wars. The Banana Wars, please go look up the Banana Wars. It ain't only happen in Puerto Rico, happen in what they deem Latin America, throughout the Caribbean islands. Please go look up the Banana Wars, please. We need to start holding accountable. The same way when we talk about reparations by the governments and all that. One, I don't think enough of us really realize on how many governments really need to be paying reparations, especially when a lot of the lands had traded hands due to colonial superpowers, so that we got to understand. But the biggest thing to understand is we're not trying to hold no corporations accountable, when the reality is the governments uphold the status for the corporations to be able to go do what they do, because that's what draws in revenue for their economy. So when we sitting here and we asking for reparations, or we asking for this, or we asking for that, yo guys, why are we shooting ourselves in the foot if we're not holding the ones who profited the most, which are the corporations?
Also a U.S. corporation, owned over 200,000 acres of prime Colombian farmland.
United Fruit.
In December of that year, its officials savagely ended a labor strike in what became known as the Banana Massacre, resulting in the deaths of 1,000 men, women, and children. By 1930, United Fruit owned over 1 million acres of land in Guatemala, Honduras, Colombia, Panama, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Cuba. By 1940, United Fruit owned 50% of all private land in Honduras.
50%.
By 1942, it owned 75% of all private land in Guatemala.
75.
Plus most of Guatemala's roads, power stations, and phone lines, the only Pacific seaport, and every mile of railroad. By 1950, U.S. banks owned over half the arable land in Puerto Rico, plus the insular postal system, the entire coastal railroad, and San Juan's international seaport. The Pentagon controlled another 13% of the island. Throughout the 20th century, the U.S. installed authoritarian regimes.
You know what they mean by the Pentagon, right? Meaning the military occupies the rest.
U.S. interests, and supported by local armed forces. Being a good neighbor, in fact, meant supporting dictators. Rafael Leonidas Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, Juan Vicente Gomez in Venezuela, Jorge Ubico in Guatemala, Tiburcio Carías in Honduras, Fulgencio Batista in Cuba, Augusto Pinochet in Chile, and the Somoza dynasty in Nicaragua. The U.S. government financed all these regimes, providing military support whenever necessary.
Off topic, but we could say the same thing about the Middle East, right? Everything that they've done, every T-word organization they've created, they funded, they financed, they trained, until they're no longer useful for them. And that's where kind of a lot of the conflict comes into play, especially on a geopolitical level, which is always hidden from U.S. citizens, because if you would understand how we create a lot of those situations and dynamics, you wouldn't be in full agreement with your government either. That's the point, and that's the reason why it's hidden from us. But let's get into it. We almost done, guys.
Any dissent or discussion of national sovereignty was viewed as rebellion and crushed bloodily, not for democracy or civilization, but for the benefit of vested interests.
Capital.
General Smedley Butler confirmed this with shocking clarity and detail in his 1935 article, "I Was a Gangster for Capitalism." I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers in 1909 to 1912. I helped make Mexico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1960. American exceptionalism.
I would recommend go read the book, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's very similar. That's why that's the book I thought he was talking about, but I guess not. But go look up the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman. That talks everything that he just mentioned in that other book. Talks about it in that book.
Racial superiority and national destiny psychically undergirded this international plunder. In the case of Puerto Rico, the very first civilian governor, Charles Herbert Allen, saw the opportunities for immediate exploitation. With American capital and American energies, the labor of the natives can be utilized to the lasting benefit of all parties. The introduction of fresh blood is needed. With justification granted by manifest destiny, Allen resigned his governorship and assumed control over the entire Puerto Rican economy through a company that eventually became known as Domino Sugar. Exceptionalism worked well for Allen, U.S. investment bankers, and other members of the American elite. Ironically, though the vested interests remain to this day, the exceptionalism proved a myth. In 2007, China became the world's top exporter. As of 2010, it is the world's leading manufacturer and the greatest producer of patents. In 2012, it unveiled the world's most powerful computer and also became the world's primary source of global trade. Also in 2012, for the second time in a row, Chinese schoolchildren led the world in the Program for International Student Assessment Scores for reading, math, and science. South Korea and Japan ranked second and third. The United States came in 36th, behind Vietnam, Taiwan, New Zealand, the Slovak Republic, and nearly every country in Eastern and Western Europe. The American century had ended, with a whimper rather than a bang. Albizu Campos understood the fraudulence of American exceptionalism. As the first Puerto Rican to attend Harvard College and Harvard Law School, he witnessed power and privilege in its nascent stages, and willingly forwent its suasions, rejecting judgeships, corporate sinecures, and outright bribes, and devoting himself obsessively and single-mindedly to the cause of Puerto Rican independence. He was rewarded with 25 years in prison. His family received constant death threats. His homes were attacked in Ponce, Aguas Buenas, and San Juan. His law license was revoked. His neighbors were investigated. His phone was tapped. His mail was intercepted. FBI vehicles parked outside his house, and dozens of FBI agents followed him 7 days a week all over the island. Public Law 53, the gag law, was passed specifically to thwart him, to eliminate his freedom of speech. Finally, strong evidence indicates that after being condemned to life imprisonment, Albizu was irradiated until a stroke paralyzed half of his body and left him unable to speak. His only crime was to remind the American Republic of its own founding principles, that every man is created equal, and that government requires the consent of the governed. The story of Albizu Campos is the story of Puerto Rico. It is also the story of empire. It starts 100 years ago, when America was a rising power, and continues to this day. The theologian Reinhold Niebuhr once wrote, "One of the most pathetic aspects of human history is that every civilization expresses itself most pretentiously, compounds its partial and universal values most convincingly, and claims immortality for its finite existence, at the very moment when the decay which leads to death has already begun." Albizu Campos understood this. He tried to warn the world and to save a tiny island from the ensuing chaos. 50 years of chaos. Following Albizu's death, the next 50 years saw a descent into the maelstrom, a downward spiral of chaos and corruption that turned the island into a punch-drunk fighter, unsure of its whereabouts, wobbling on its feet, pawing at empty air. Even its leadership is seeing triple and trying to hit the one in the middle. A corporate red carpet stretches from San Juan to Wall Street. Every year, a new wave of entrepreneurs, aka carpetbaggers, rolls in from El Norte with fast money schemes disguised as economic development projects. For 50 years, this charade has drained the island's economy, and more tragically, its spirit. The Caribe Hilton Hotel provides an early example of this predatory capitalism, disguised as economic aid to Puerto Rico. Through the Puerto Rico Industrial Development Company, PRIDCO, Governor Luis Muñoz Marin built the 300-room complex at a cost of $7 million, $69 million in current dollars, then handed the entire resort, the building, casino, and swimming pools, to Conrad Hilton on a 20-year lease. 1 year after the hotel opened in 1950, the people of Puerto Rico and even Congressman Vito Marcantonio, Democrat of New York, were still waiting for the governor to disclose the terms of that lease. The congressman called it a part of the governor's Operation Booby Trap economic plan for the island. Everything used in the hotel, including the furniture and even the sugar, was purchased and flown in from the United States. Nearly every management employee was from the American mainland. PRIDCO paid half of the hotel's advertising costs, $150,000 in 1950. But all the hotel profits, except a slush fund for local politicians, were repatriated to the Hilton International Corporation. Nothing was reinvested in the island. Puerto Ricans have a phrase for this. Mondo la China pa que el otro la chupe. Peel the orange so that someone else can suck it. This glaring abuse of Puerto Rican land, taxes, and labor was repeated throughout the entire island during Operation Bootstrap. By 1965, over 1,000 bootstrap factories dotted the island, lured by cheap labor and 10-year corporate tax exemptions. Instead of growing fruit, coffee, and sugarcane, Puerto Ricans now manufactured bras and razors behind concrete walls. Unfortunately, once Playtex and Schick found cheaper labor in Asia, the factories all disappeared. In the end, rather than providing a real economic base and self-sustaining growth, Operation Bootstrap produced only more dependency on the United States and more unemployment.
Yep.
In 1965, Congress created special tax exemptions for the petrochemical industry, and Phillips Petroleum, Union Carbide, and Sun Oil rushed down to build facilities on the island. When the OPEC oil embargo hit in 1973, they canceled all plans and shut down their Puerto Rican operations. In 1976, Congress passed 26 U.S. Code Section 936, a tax credit for businesses operating in Puerto Rico, commonly known on the island as La 936. As a result, a pharmaceutical industry exploded on the island. Johnson & Johnson saved $1 billion in federal taxes between 1980 and 1990.
Listen up.
SmithKline Beecham saved $987 million. Merck and Company, $749 million. Bristol-Myers Squibb, $627 million. Puerto Rico became the offshore tax haven for the entire U.S. drug industry and the world's largest producer of pharmaceuticals, accounting for nearly 25% of total shipments. All of this ended in 2006 when Congress eliminated the tax credit, and 100,000 Puerto Ricans were rapidly unemployed. A 6% economic growth rate in the 1950s slowed to 5% in the 1960s, 4% in the 1970s, and 0% in the 1980s. From 1972 to 1986, the number of Puerto Ricans employed in manufacturing dropped by 2,000, and the government payroll rose by 49,000. In 2015, the unemployment rate is over 15%, and the government is teetering on bankruptcy. Operation Bootstrap, with its corporate giveaways and trickle-down economics, was a complete failure in Puerto Rico. In all of this chaos, there clearly is no economic development plan for Puerto Rico. Just a series of tax shelters for well-connected corporations. As noted by historian and journalist Eduardo Galeano, this pattern is common throughout Latin America. There are always politicians and technocrats ready to show that the invasion of industrializing foreign capital benefits the area invaded. In this version, the new model imperialism comes on a genuinely civilizing mission, as a blessing to the dominated countries, but it spreads poverty even more widely and concentrates wealth even more narrowly. It assumes proprietary rights. With great wisdom, Galeano concluded, "Aid works like the philanthropist who put a wooden leg on his piglet because he was eating it bit by bit." For several decades, the piglet fought back. In 1954, Lolita Lebron and two nationalists opened fire on the U.S. House floor, wounding 5 congressmen. In 1971, the Hilton Hotel, a selective services center, and a GE office building were all bombed in San Juan. A revolutionary group called Los Macheteros stole $7.1 million from a West Hartford, Connecticut branch of Wells Fargo on September 12, 1983, the anniversary of Pedro Albizu Campos' birth date. Chaos theory. Today, 50 years after Albizu's death, the piglet is tired, and the chaos is full-blown. Unemployment, 15.4%, is higher than anywhere in the United States, and the poverty rate, 45%, is nearly twice that of Mississippi, the poorest state in the Union. The per capita income of $15,200 is barely over 1/3, 36%, of U.S. per capita income. In 2006, the government shut down for 2 weeks because it lacked the cash to meet expenses. Since 2010, the island has eliminated 33,000 government jobs, rolled back pensions, raised the retirement age, hiked university tuitions, and increased sales and business taxes. Utility rates are now 300% higher than the U.S. average. Throughout San Juan and in smaller cities, shuttered houses and empty storefronts line the streets. Puerto Rico owes $70 billion in public debt and $13 billion in unfunded pension liabilities,
That's crazy.
totaling over $22,000 for every man, woman, and child on the island. This debt is more than that of New York City and nearly 4 times that of Detroit. On February 4th, 2014, Standard & Poor's, S&P, lowered Puerto Rico's credit rating to junk bond status, and Moody's Investor Service lowered it to BA2, 1 step lower than the S&P score. The turmoil doesn't end there. The crime rate has soared, with a per capita murder rate 6 times, 600% higher than that of the United States. In 2011, Puerto Rico broke its own record, with 1,136 homicides, putting it on par with civil war zones like Congo and Sudan. Of these murders, 70% are drug-related, and 80% of those drugs flow into the U.S. mainland.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Just as in El Norte, the most accessible career for many young Puerto Ricans is to sell drugs, get shot, go to jail, and become a reggaeton rap artist. The entire island has become that cynical. The police aren't helping much. In 2001, one of the largest police corruption cases in U.S. history saw 28 police officers arrested for drug dealing, protecting cocaine dealers, and transporting drugs through and off the island. Between 2005 and 2010, over 1,700 Puerto Rico Police Department, PRPD officers, were arrested on charges ranging from theft and assault to drug trafficking and murder. In 2011, the Department of Justice issued a report citing the staggering level of crime and corruption involving PRPD officers, including drug dealing, gun running, and murder. A 2012 American Civil Liberties Union investigation determined that the PRPD is a dysfunctional and recalcitrant police department that has run amok for years. People are fleeing the island.
We got 10 minutes left, guys. 10 minutes.
It lost a net 54,000 residents, or nearly 1.5% of its population. In both 2012 and 2013, it lost another 1%. Puerto Ricans are pouring into Florida, New York, and Texas to escape the gunfire tearing through their homeland. More than 5 million now live in the mainland United States, over 2 million of them in New York and Florida alone. Puerto Rico is on pace to lose 40% of its population by 2050. They're leaving because the Puerto Rico they once knew is gone. Is there a solution to all this? Of course. But the complicated ones rarely work. Those that have been tried include corporate tax subsidies to giant pharmaceutical companies.
Listen.
A fraudulent war on drugs.
Listen.
Government subsidies, austerity programs, and real estate speculation. These solutions breed government fraud, police corruption, absentee ownership, junk bonds, media spin, and rampant hotels, shopping malls, and parking lots. The answer may be much simpler. It starts with an honest self-appraisal. It acknowledges the eviction of an entire people, literally and systematically from their own land. It recognizes that predatory economics is a raging parasite that will destroy its host. It sees that Puerto Rico is a harbinger of cultural and political consequences that are imminent, global, and unavoidable. Too many people have been converted into debtors, renters, consumers, gullible voters, abused taxpayers, ill-paid laborers, and passive audiences, all for the benefit of a privileged few. The notion of floating an American way of life at the expense of the entire planet is no longer sustainable. Particularly when that life consists of little more than Black Fridays, widescreen TVs, internet chat rooms, comic book films, and corporate and political fraud. A positive future for Puerto Rico and other comparable republics will require less greed and more humility. Across the social order, from the 1% to the 99%, we might listen a little more to our artists and less to our corporations. Here's a good place to start. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot with a pink hotel, a boutique, and a swinging hotspot. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Sources and methodology. The voices in this book remained unheard for 100 years. The events were hidden, misrepresented, or ignored. The major participants are dead. This book has a responsibility to represent people and events fairly and accurately. For the first time, after a century of official suppression and neglect. I used over 6,000 public records, many of them obtained under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, from agencies including the FBI, the CIA, the Puerto Rico Insular Police, the Puerto Rico Department of Public Instruction, the Puerto Rico Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Defense, the Office of Naval Intelligence, federal courts, public hospitals, morgues, and police precincts. These documents served two critical roles. They confirmed in great detail the events related to me by dozens of Puerto Rican nationalists. They also revealed the means by which government corruption and indifference can erase from the public record the experiences of a colonized people. Throughout the book, the thoughts of individuals were not divined. They were ascertained through diaries, personal correspondence, autobiographies, monographs, and interviews. The interviewees included the direct participants themselves, as well as observers, family members, friends, and on-the-scene reporters. In several key areas, those interviews were longitudinal. I repeated them for years, and in some cases, over several decades. Whenever I sought to grasp retrospectively a person's thinking at a given moment, or when I sought to retrace the complexity of someone's views, the interviewing, document review, and fact-checking intensified before any paraphrase was employed. The prison conversations were relayed by several nationalists, by inmates from La Princesa and El Oso Blanco prisons, and by survivors from the Aguadilla safe house near any Air Force base. One medical assistant from the Aguadilla safe house was especially specific with regard to Captain Roth, Dr. Heb, and their sessions with Vidal Santiago Diaz. Customers, barbers, and several members of the 65th Infantry Regiment, the Borinqueniers, who frequented the shop, reported the conversations in Salon Boricua. WIAC journalists Miguel Angel Alvarez and Luis LBB Marrero described to me events and discussions at the Battle of Salon Boricua. Both men were present at the scene throughout the entire battle and reported it live via radio. Borinqueniers and other customers confirmed the events in the club with no name. 3 Borinqueniers who served under Waller Booth in Operation Portrex heard the details about his Camp X training and World War II experiences behind enemy lines. They were kind enough to share these details with me. The information about Luis Munoz Marin's early years in New York, about Collegiate, Georgie Yees, Greenwich Village, and Joe Gould, stems from several Cuban socialists who lived with Munoz Marin on 39th Street and Broadway, knew Joe Gould, lent money to both of them, and grew tired of buying them drinks. My mother, Sarah Rabasa, and my maternal grandmother, Salome Rodriguez, both attended Central Grammar School and reported to me the conditions and classroom events at the school. Chief Justice Jose Trias Monge confirmed island-wide conditions in Puerto Rico, the trials of the oldest colony in the world. Julio Feliciano Colon was a sugarcane cutter, machetero in Santa Isabel for 40 years. He supported his mother and younger brother, then his own wife and children, with tool-worn hands and a crooked spine. I met him in Santa Isabel, where he recounted a lifetime of struggle, dreams, and despair. As a cadet of the Republic, he was present at the Ponce Massacre on Palm Sunday, March 21st, 1937.
Listen up.
Juan Emilio Vigüe related to me his experiences and conversations after a screening of his film Vecinos, Neighbors, a propaganda film sponsored by the Puerto Rico Department of Education. In a private home before a small invited audience, of which I was a member, Vigüe screened both versions of that film. Governor Munoz Marin had censored the original, deeming it communistic, as well as his Ponce Massacre film, and footage from the Battle of Salon Boricua. Vigüe also discussed the repressive climate in the aftermath of the Ponce Massacre, the prevailing sense of terror throughout the island, and the visit of Pedro Rodriguez Serra from the district attorney's office, and the making of the life of General Villa. A subsequent interview with his son, Juan Emilio Vigüe Jr., confirmed all of these events. A meeting with actor Juano Hernandez additionally confirmed the discussions and events relating to the life of General Villa. Interviews with dozens of nationalists over a period of 40 years have substantiated the research in this book. These individuals had all lived in a world where selfishness was a great asset, a world owned by strangers and governed by corruption, a world so threatening and capricious that to tell the truth was to risk one's livelihood, one's freedom, and sometimes one's life. It took a long time, in some cases years, to earn their trust, but it was worth every moment. I extend to them my deepest appreciation and respect. Their testimony was consistent with the historical record, yet subtler, more granular, more detailed. Their personal recollections, with respect to the Ponce Massacre, the Rio Piedras Massacre, the trial of Albizu Campos, the gag law arrests, the 1934 sugarcane strike, the police terror of Governor Blanton Winship, the haplessness of Moncho Reyes, and the conditions at La Princesa and El Oso Blanco prisons, all closely parallel the newspaper accounts, congressional testimony, and FBI files from 1930 to 1965. In addition, the sheer volume of people who disappeared, los desaparecidos, throughout the island, the murder of 17 unarmed Puerto Ricans in broad daylight during the Ponce Massacre of 1937, the bombing of Jayuya and Utuado by the U.S. Air Force, the machine gun execution of 4 men in Utuado, the mass arrest of 3,000 U.S. citizens without evidence or probable cause, and the 100,000 secret and illegal carpetas, All affirm the experiences related by these brave men and women who fought a lonely battle against the most powerful empire in history. During every interview, I saw a melancholy in the eyes of these nationalists. They reminded me of something my grandmother once told me. Puerto Rican eyes are all dark, with lots of yesterdays in them. This concludes War Against All Puerto Ricans by Nelson A. Dennis. Narrated by Peter Burkrot. Copyright 2015.
Salute to everybody. This was an amazing book. Yo, I gotta thank Nelson Dennis for putting the hard work and bringing this book to light. Man, this is heavy. Every time I read it, it's pretty heavy. And I actually got the privilege to meet him back in 2022. He actually signed this copy for me, which was definitely dope. But that does finally end the chapter on here. We are moving on to another book. I don't know if we're gonna get on tomorrow. Maybe just jump straight into Monday. Give myself a day to rest because I got a couple of things I got to do tomorrow. But this was dope, guys. I really appreciate all the love and support. Salute to everybody on YouTube. I still got a couple of people tuning in, watching, showing love on YouTube. That was mad dope. I really appreciate everybody. If you haven't went and subscribed, please do me a favor. Jump over to YouTube really quick. It's the same name, AfroTaino 88. And go subscribe and hit the notification bell so that way you guys can be able to keep up with some of the books that we go through. And if you miss a session and you ain't been able to keep up with it, again, the archives is a phenomenal way to go keep up on your own pace. So salute to everybody. Don't forget the Young Lords Back to Borinquen project. We are going to Yabucoa, Puerto Rico from October 6th to the 15th at the Marco Sanchez Community Center. So if you guys want to donate, you guys want to help on TikTok, the GoFundMe link is in the bio. If anybody else on YouTube, any of that wants to be able to help, volunteer, donate, listen, reach out to me on TikTok. You guys see it, AfroTaino 88, the same way it's on YouTube. You can go find me on TikTok and just shoot me a message and a follow. I really appreciate everybody for tapping in, doing what you guys do. I'm gonna keep doing what I do. We're gonna stay positive, productive, and we're gonna open the door for knowledge and education. And like I always tell you guys, don't allow somebody else to dictate the rest of your day. You're in full control of that. So if you gotta close some doors behind you and lock that shit and walk away from that shit, do what you do. Protect your peace of mind. We all got to at some point. Peace, blessings, positivity. I'm gonna catch you guys later. One. And it's a wrap, guys. We done. Let me log off of here. Done.